The retreat of massive ice sheets around 11,700 years ago marked more than a geological transition. It fundamentally altered the trajectory of human civilization. As temperatures rose and glacial barriers dissolved, vast territories previously locked under kilometers of ice became available for human habitation. The Laurentide ice sheet, which had covered much of northern North America, began its inexorable retreat, while the Fennoscandian ice sheet similarly withdrew from northern Europe. These environmental transformations created unprecedented opportunities and challenges that would force human societies to develop entirely new survival strategies. The warming climate brought dramatic changes to global ecosystems. Tundra landscapes gradually gave way to expanding forests of birch, pine, and eventually oak and elm. Megafauna that had dominated Pleistocene environments, mammoth, giant ground sloths, cave bears and saber-toothed cats, faced extinction as their cold-adapted habitats disappeared. This faunal turnover eliminated many of the large game species that Paleolithic hunters had relied upon for millennia, creating a subsistence crisis that demanded innovative solutions. In the Levant, archaeological evidence reveals how human groups responded to these environmental pressures through increasingly sophisticated resource management. The Natufian culture, flourishing between 12,500 and 9,500 BC, represents a crucial transitional phase. Natufian sites like Ain Malaha and Wadi Hameh 27 contain the earliest known permanent settlements, featuring circular stone houses with plastered floors and storage facilities. These communities developed specialized tools for processing wild cereals, stone mortars, pestles and sickle blades with distinctive silica gloss from cutting grass stems. The Younger Dryas period temporarily reversed this warming trend, plunging much of the northern hemisphere back into near-glacial conditions. This climatic reversal, possibly triggered by the collapse of the North American ice sheet disrupting ocean circulation patterns, created severe environmental stress. Archaeological evidence from sites across the eastern Mediterranean shows population decline and site abandonment during this period. The cold, dry conditions reduced the availability of wild plant foods and forced human groups to develop more intensive foraging strategies. At Tel Abu Huraira in Syria, excavations revealed how communities adapted to Younger Dryas conditions through dietary diversification. Plant remains show increased reliance on small seeds, nuts and tubers, resources requiring more intensive processing but available when larger game became scarce. The site's occupants developed specialized grinding stones and roasting pits to make these foods digestible and nutritious. Tool assemblages from this period show increased standardization and efficiency, reflecting the need to maximize returns from limited resources. The end of the Younger Dryas around 11,700 BC ushered in the Holocene epoch and created conditions that would prove ideal for agricultural development. Rising temperatures and increased precipitation expanded the ranges of wild cereals and legumes across the Fertile Crescent. Wild emmer wheat, einkorn and barley formed dense stands in upland areas, while wild lentils, peas and chickpeas proliferated in suitable habitats. These plant communities provided the genetic foundation for the world's first agricultural systems. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey stands as perhaps the most remarkable testament to the social and technological capabilities of early Neolithic communities. Dating to approximately 9,500 BC, this site predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years and challenges traditional assumptions about the relationship between agriculture and monumental architecture. The site consists of multiple circular enclosures, each containing massive T-shaped limestone pillars weighing up to 16 tons. These monoliths, quarried from nearby bedrock using stone tools, display sophisticated carved reliefs depicting wild animals, snakes, scorpions, wild boar, aurochs and birds of prey. The construction of Göbekli Tepe required unprecedented levels of social organisation and technological expertise. Archaeological analysis suggests that individual pillars required teams of 20, 30 people working for several months to quarry, transport and erect. The site's builders developed specialised techniques for moving massive stones using wooden levers, rollers and rope systems. Stone tool analysis reveals the use of carefully shaped flint picks and chisels for detailed carving work, while heavier basalt hammerstones were employed for rougher shaping. The iconography at Göbekli Tepe provides insights into the symbolic world of early Neolithic peoples. The T-shaped pillars likely represent stylized human figures, with carved arms and hands visible on some examples. Animal reliefs appear to follow specific compositional rules, with predators often positioned above prey species. Three-dimensional sculptures of wild boar and lions demonstrate sophisticated artistic abilities, while abstract symbols, crescents, circles and H-shapes suggest the development of symbolic communication systems. Pre-pottery Neolithic Jericho reveals another dimension of early Neolithic innovation. The site's massive stone tower, standing 8.5 metres high with an internal staircase of 22 stone steps, represents one of humanity's earliest monumental constructions. Built from roughly shaped limestone blocks weighing several hundred kilograms each, the tower required careful planning and coordinated labour. Its purpose remains debated: defensive structure, astronomical observatory, or ritual monument, but its construction demonstrates sophisticated engineering capabilities. Jericho's defensive wall, extending around the settlement's perimeter, consisted of stone foundations supporting mud brick superstructures. Archaeological evidence suggests the wall stood approximately 4 metres high and incorporated bastions and gates. The scale of these fortifications implies both the wealth of the community and the existence of external threats, possibly from competing groups seeking access to the site's abundant freshwater spring. The development of new stone tool technologies accompanied these architectural innovations. Ground stone tools, requiring different manufacturing techniques than knapped implements, became increasingly important during this period. Stone axes and adzes, shaped through pecking and grinding rather than flaking, provided more durable cutting edges for woodworking. These tools enabled the construction of substantial timber structures and the clearing of forest areas for cultivation. Harvesting implements underwent significant evolution as communities began managing wild plant resources more intensively. Sickle blades, hafted in wooden or bone handles, allowed efficient cutting of grass stems. Microscopic analysis reveals that many blades show use-wear patterns consistent with cutting silica-rich plant stems, while others were used for cutting softer materials like reeds or bark. The standardization of blade forms suggests specialized production by skilled craftspeople. Grinding technology advanced considerably during this period as communities needed to process increasing quantities of plant foods. Large basalt grinding stones, sometimes weighing over 100 kilograms, were carefully shaped to provide optimal surfaces for crushing seeds and grains. Smaller handstones, ergonomically designed for extended use, show wear patterns indicating hours of daily grinding activity. Some sites contain dozens of these implements, suggesting communal food processing activities. Storage technologies developed alongside processing innovations as communities needed to preserve seasonal surpluses. Large stone-lined pits, plastered with lime mortar, provided secure storage for processed grains and other foods. At sites like Netiv Hagdud in the Jordan Valley, archaeologists have identified storage facilities capable of holding several tons of plant materials. These installations represent significant investments in infrastructure and demonstrate long-term planning horizons. The transition from mobile to sedentary lifestyles created new challenges and opportunities for tool production. Sedentary communities could maintain heavier toolkits and invest in specialized implements that would have been impractical for mobile groups. Workshop areas at sites like Mureybet in Syria contain evidence of intensive stone tool production, including specialised cores, debitage, and finished implements. The presence of exotic raw materials, obsidian from Anatolia, flint from distant sources, indicates expanding trade networks. Bone and antler working also advanced significantly during this period. Specialised tools for hide processing, basketry, and textile production appear in archaeological assemblages. Bone needles, some less than 2 millimeters in diameter, demonstrate remarkable craftsmanship and suggest the production of fine textiles or leather goods. Antler picks and digging sticks show adaptations for specific subsistence tasks, while decorated bone implements hint at developing artistic traditions. The evidence from these early Neolithic sites reveals communities undergoing rapid technological and social transformation. The ability to construct monumental architecture like Göbekli Tepe required not only technical skills but also social mechanisms for organising large-scale labour projects. The presence of feasting remains, thousands of animal bones from communal meals, suggests that ritual gatherings played important roles in maintaining social cohesion and coordinating group activities. Settlement patterns during this period show increasing investment in permanent installations. Houses at sites like Jurf el Ahmar in Syria feature substantial stone foundations, plastered floors, and built-in storage facilities. Some structures contain elaborate decorative elements, painted plaster, carved stone reliefs, and carefully arranged animal skulls, indicating the development of household-based ritual practices. The standardization of architectural forms across sites suggests shared cultural traditions and possibly population movements. The archaeological record from this transitional period demonstrates humanity's remarkable adaptability in the face of environmental change. The innovations developed during these 5 centuries, monumental architecture, ground stone technology, intensive plant processing, and permanent settlements, would provide the foundation for the agricultural revolution that followed. These communities had not yet domesticated plants or animals, but they had developed many of the social and technological prerequisites for agricultural life. The technological and social foundations established during the preceding centuries would prove instrumental as human communities across the globe embarked upon one of history's most transformative developments. Between 9,500 and 8,000 BC, multiple regions witnessed the independent emergence of agricultural practices that would fundamentally alter the relationship between humans and their environment. This transition did not occur as a sudden revelation, but rather as a gradual intensification of existing plant and animal management strategies, driven by demographic pressures, environmental opportunities, and accumulated knowledge about biological systems. In the Fertile Crescent, the domestication process began with 8 species that would become known as the founder crops, a suite of plants that provided the nutritional and economic foundation for the world's first agricultural societies. Emmer wheat and einkorn wheat represented the most significant cereals in this package. Wild emmer grew naturally in dense stands across the upland regions of the southern Levant, southeastern Turkey, and northern Syria, thriving in areas with 300-700 millimeters of annual rainfall. The plant's large seeds, containing approximately 12 to 15% protein and substantial carbohydrate reserves, made it an attractive target for intensive harvesting. Archaeological evidence from sites like Tel Aswad and Tel Essawan reveals the gradual morphological changes that mark the transition from wild to domestic wheat varieties. The most significant transformation involved the rachis, the stem segment that connects seeds to the plant. Wild wheat possessed a brittle rachis that shattered upon ripening, dispersing seeds naturally across the landscape. Domestic varieties developed a tough rachis that retained seeds on the plant, facilitating human harvesting but making the plant dependent upon human intervention for reproduction. Microscopic analysis of carbonized wheat remains shows this transition occurring gradually over several centuries, with intermediate forms displaying varying degrees of rachis toughness. Barley underwent similar domestication processes, with wild populations concentrated in the Jordan Valley, the anti-Lebanon mountains, and parts of Iran and Turkey. Two-row barley, characterized by single fertile florets at each rachis node, appeared first in the archaeological record, followed later by six-row varieties with 3 fertile florets per node. The domestication syndrome in barley included not only non-shattering rachizas, but also synchronized ripening. Wild barley seeds matured at different times to maximize dispersal opportunities, while domestic varieties ripened simultaneously to facilitate efficient harvesting. The legume component of the founder crops package included lentils, peas, chickpeas, and bitter vetch. These plants provided essential amino acids lacking in cereal grains, creating nutritionally complete protein profiles when consumed together. Wild lentils grew abundantly in oak pistachio woodlands throughout the Fertile Crescent, producing small, dark seeds with thick, impermeable seed coats. Domestication involved selecting for larger seeds with thinner coats that absorbed water more readily during cooking. Archaeological lentils from Abu Huraira show a clear size increase beginning around 9000 BC, with domestic varieties containing seeds nearly twice the diameter of their wild ancestors. Pea domestication followed similar patterns, with wild forms producing small, hard seeds that required extended soaking and cooking to become digestible. Domestic varieties developed larger seeds with smoother surfaces and reduced dormancy mechanisms. The transformation appears most clearly at sites like Tel el-Kirk in Syria, where pea remains show progressive size, increases and morphological changes between 9200 and 8500 BC. Chickpeas underwent comparable modifications, with domestic varieties losing the rough, sculptured seed surfaces characteristic of wild forms. Bitter vetch presented unique challenges as a crop plant due to its toxic compounds, neurotoxic amino acids that could cause paralysis in humans and animals if consumed in large quantities. However, these compounds could be reduced through careful processing involving soaking, boiling and fermentation. Archaeological evidence suggests that early farmers developed sophisticated detoxification techniques, making bitter vetch a reliable protein source during periods when other legumes were unavailable. The plant's ability to grow in marginal soils and harsh climatic conditions made it particularly valuable as a backup crop. Flax completed the founder crops package, providing both nutritional and technological resources. Wild flax produced small, oily seeds rich in omega-3 fatty acids, while its fibrous stems could be processed into textiles. The domestication process involved selecting for larger seeds and longer, stronger stem fibers. Archaeological textiles from sites like Catalhoyuk demonstrate sophisticated flax processing techniques, including retting, spinning, and weaving. The appearance of specialized tools, flax combs for separating fibers, spindle whorls for thread production, and loom weights for textile weaving marks the integration of flax cultivation into early agricultural systems. The transformation of these wild plants into domestic varieties required sophisticated understanding of plant biology and careful selection over multiple generations. Early farmers needed to recognize desirable traits, save seeds from superior plants, and maintain breeding populations large enough to prevent inbreeding depression. This process demanded detailed knowledge of planting seasons, soil requirements, water needs, and harvesting techniques. Archaeological evidence suggests that different communities specialized in particular crops, with some sites showing high concentrations of wheat remains, while others emphasized barley or legumes. Beyond the Fertile Crescent, independent agricultural developments were occurring in several other regions during this same period. In the Yangtze River Valley of China, communities began cultivating wild rice around 9000 BC. The Kwahukiao site in the Yangtze River Delta has yielded some of the earliest evidence for rice cultivation, including wooden mortars and pestles specifically designed for processing rice grains. Phytolith analysis, microscopic examination of silica bodies produced by plants, reveals the gradual morphological changes associated with rice domestication, particularly the development of non-shattering panicles and synchronized ripening. Chinese rice cultivation developed in wetland environments quite different from the semi-arid conditions of Fertile Crescent agriculture. Wild rice grew naturally in shallow lakes, marshes and river margins, requiring communities to develop specialized techniques for managing water levels and creating artificial wetlands. Archaeological evidence from Hemudu and other Neolithic sites shows sophisticated water management systems, including dikes, channels, and controlled flooding mechanisms. The cultivation of rice in flooded fields created unique ecological niches that supported diverse plant and animal communities while providing reliable carbohydrate production. In Mesoamerica, the domestication of squash began around 8000 BC in the Tehuacan Valley of Mexico. Wild squash produced small bitter fruits with hard shells, primarily valued for their nutritious seeds rather than their flesh. Domestic varieties developed larger fruits with reduced bitterness and thinner shells, making the flesh edible and nutritious. Archaeological squash remains from Gila Naquit's cave show clear morphological changes including increased fruit size, reduced seed coat thickness, and modified rind characteristics. The domestication process appears to have been gradual, with intermediate forms persisting for several millennia. Squash domestication in Mesoamerica occurred within a different ecological context than cereal agriculture in the Old World. The plant grew as part of a polyculture system that would eventually include maize and beans, the famous Three Sisters combination that provided nutritional complementarity and ecological sustainability. Early squash cultivation required understanding of seasonal rainfall patterns, soil drainage characteristics, and companion planting techniques. The development of storage gourds from squash varieties provided essential containers for water and food storage in semi-arid environments. These independent agricultural developments demonstrate the convergent evolution of farming practices under similar demographic and environmental pressures. In each region, growing populations faced declining returns from wild resource exploitation, while climate change created new opportunities for intensive plant management. The development of agriculture required not only botanical knowledge but also social mechanisms for coordinating labour, sharing resources, and maintaining collective investments in land improvement and crop development. The shift toward agricultural production catalysed fundamental changes in human settlement patterns. The seasonal camps characteristic of late Paleolithic and early Neolithic societies gave way to permanent villages anchored by agricultural fields and storage facilities. These settlements required substantial investments in infrastructure that would have been impractical for mobile communities. At Tel Es Salwan in Iraq, excavations have revealed a planned village layout with rectangular houses arranged along streets, surrounded by defensive walls and irrigation channels. The architecture of early agricultural villages reflected both practical needs and emerging social distinctions. Houses at sites like Jarmo in Iraq featured substantial stone foundations, supporting mud brick walls constructed using standardized brick sizes and construction techniques. Mud brick technology represented a significant innovation, allowing communities to create durable structures using locally available materials. The bricks were formed in wooden molds, dried in the sun, and laid with mud mortar to create walls capable of supporting multi-story structures. Interior spaces within these houses show increasing specialization for different activities. Storage rooms contained large ceramic vessels and stone-lined pits for preserving grain and other agricultural products. Grinding areas featured built-in installations with large grinding stones permanently mounted in plaster platforms. Cooking areas included specialized ovens, hearths, and food preparation surfaces. Some houses contained workshops for tool production, textile manufacture, or other craft activities, suggesting emerging economic specialization within communities. The demographic implications of agricultural adoption were profound and far-reaching. Reliable food production supported larger populations than hunting and gathering economies, while sedentary lifestyles reduced infant mortality rates by eliminating the physical stresses of frequent movement. Archaeological evidence from early agricultural sites shows substantial population increases, with settlements growing from small hamlets of 20, 50 people to villages supporting several hundred residents. Population growth created new social challenges and opportunities. Larger communities required mechanisms for resolving disputes, coordinating collective activities, and managing shared resources. Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of social hierarchies, with some individuals gaining access to superior housing, exotic goods, and specialized tools. Burial practices became more elaborate, with some graves containing multiple individuals, valuable grave goods, and evidence of complex mortuary rituals. The increased population density also facilitated technological innovation and knowledge transfer. Larger communities could support craft specialists who developed sophisticated techniques for pottery production, metallurgy, and textile manufacture. The concentration of skilled artisans accelerated technological development while creating products that could be exchanged with other communities. Archaeological assemblages from early agricultural sites show increasing standardization of tool forms and manufacturing techniques, suggesting the development of specialized production systems. Agricultural communities also developed new forms of social organization to manage collective resources and coordinate seasonal activities. Planting, harvesting, and food processing required synchronized group labor that exceeded the capabilities of individual households. Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of community leaders who organized collective work parties, managed food distribution during shortages, and coordinated defense against external threats. The construction of communal facilities, large storage buildings, ceremonial structures, and defensive works demonstrates the ability to mobilize substantial labor forces for collective projects. The transition to agriculture also created new relationships between human communities and their physical environments. Agricultural fields required long-term investments in soil improvement, water management, and pest control that tied communities to particular locations. The development of permanent settlements created anthropogenic landscapes where human activities fundamentally altered local ecosystems. Archaeological pollen records from early agricultural sites show dramatic changes in vegetation patterns, with natural forest communities replaced by agricultural fields and managed grazing areas. The transformation of human-animal relationships during this period represented a parallel revolution to plant domestication, one that would prove equally fundamental in reshaping human societies. While communities across the Fertile Crescent were developing increasingly sophisticated agricultural systems, they simultaneously began the complex process of bringing wild animals under human control. This development did not emerge in isolation, but rather as an integrated response to the same demographic pressures and environmental opportunities that had driven agricultural innovation. The domestication of animals followed a markedly different timeline than plant cultivation, with dogs representing the earliest and most geographically widespread example of human-animal partnership. Archaeological evidence from sites across Eurasia indicates that dog domestication began approximately 15,000 years ago, during the late Paleolithic period, making it significantly older than any agricultural development. The Bonneber Castle site in Germany has yielded remains of a dog buried alongside human individuals around 14,200 years ago, displaying clear morphological distinctions from contemporary wolf populations. The skull shows reduced tooth size, shortened snout length, and modified cranial proportions characteristic of domestic dogs. genetic analysis of ancient dog remains reveals a complex domestication process involving multiple wolf populations across different geographical regions. Mitochondrial DNA studies suggest that East Asian wolves contributed significantly to early dog lineages, while nuclear DNA analysis indicates substantial genetic input from European wolf populations. The Ust-Ishim dog from Siberia, dating to approximately 33,000 years ago, represents one of the earliest examples of morphological changes associated with domestication, though the continuity between these early forms and later domestic dogs remains debated. The behavioural modifications accompanying dog domestication were as significant as the physical changes. Archaeological evidence from Natufian sites in the Levant shows dogs integrated into human burial practices, with individuals interred alongside human remains in formal cemetery contexts. At Ayin Malaha, a human burial dated to 12,000 years ago includes a puppy positioned with its paw resting on the deceased person's chest, suggesting emotional bonds between humans and their canine companions. These burial practices indicate that dogs had achieved special status within human communities, transcending their practical utility as hunting partners or camp guards. The transition from dog domestication to the control of ungulate species represented a qualitatively different challenge, requiring communities to manage large, potentially dangerous animals with complex social behaviours. The domestication of sheep began around 9000 BC in the Zagros Mountains of Iran and eastern Anatolia, where wild mouflon populations provided the ancestral stock for domestic varieties. The Zawi Kemi Shanida site in Iraq contains some of the earliest evidence for sheep management, with faunal assemblages showing age and sex profiles inconsistent with natural predation patterns, but consistent with human culling strategies. Wild mouflon lived in small herds of 5-10 individuals inhabiting rocky mountainous terrain where their agility and climbing abilities provided protection from predators. These animals possessed several characteristics that made them suitable for domestication: relatively small size, herbivorous diet, social organization based on dominance hierarchies, and behavioral flexibility in response to environmental changes. However, their natural wariness and tendency to flee when threatened required early herders to develop sophisticated animal handling techniques. The morphological changes accompanying sheep domestication were gradual but distinctive. Wild mouflon possessed short, coarse hair and seasonal coat changes adapted to harsh mountain environments. Domestic sheep developed longer, finer wool that could be harvested annually without harming the animal. Skeletal modifications included reduced body size, shortened leg bones, and modified horn structures. At sites like Jarmo, in Iraq, sheep remains dating between 8,500 and 7,000 BC show progressive size reduction, with domestic varieties becoming approximately 20% smaller than their wild ancestors. Goat domestication occurred simultaneously with sheep management, utilizing wild Bezoar goats from similar mountainous regions. The Ganj Dareh site in Iran provides compelling evidence for early goat management around 8,500 BC, with faunal assemblages dominated by young male goats, a pattern suggesting selective culling to maintain optimal herd composition. Wild Bezoar goats were naturally more aggressive and independent than mouflon sheep, requiring different management strategies and presenting greater challenges for human handlers. The behavioural characteristics of wild goats included strong climbing abilities, territorial aggression among males, and complex social hierarchies based on age and dominance status. Domestic goats retained many of these traits, while developing increased tolerance for human proximity and handling. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ali Kosh in Iran shows the gradual development of goat herding techniques, including the construction of stone pens and enclosures designed to contain animals during specific seasons or weather conditions. Cattle domestication represented perhaps the most significant challenge faced by early pastoralists, given the size, strength and aggressive potential of wild aurochs. These massive animals, standing up to 1.8 meters at the shoulder and weighing over 1,000 kilograms, possessed formidable horns and territorial behaviors that made them extremely dangerous to approach. The aurochs inhabited diverse environments across Europe, Asia, and North Africa, living in small herds that defended territories through aggressive displays and physical confrontations. The earliest evidence for cattle management appears around 8,500 BC at sites in central Anatolia and the northern Levant. Çatalhöyük in Turkey contains extensive evidence for cattle utilization, including wall paintings depicting humans interacting with large bovines and faunal assemblages showing systematic butchering patterns. The site's inhabitants appear to have developed specialized techniques for capturing and controlling aurochs, possibly involving the construction of large corrals and the use of trained dogs to assist in herding operations. The domestication process for cattle involves selecting for reduced aggression, increased docility, and modified physical characteristics including smaller body size and altered horn configurations. Archaeological cattle remains from sites like Sha'ar HaGolan in Israel show progressive morphological changes between 8,000 and 7,500 BC, with domestic varieties displaying shortened skulls, reduced tooth size, and modified limb proportions. These changes occurred gradually over many generations, requiring sustained breeding programs and careful selection of reproductive animals. Pig domestication followed a different trajectory, utilizing wild boar populations that lived in forested environments rather than open grasslands. Wild boar were omnivorous, intelligent, and highly adaptable animals with complex social structures based on matriarchal groups. Their natural behaviors included rooting for underground foods, wallowing in mud, and defending territories through aggressive confrontations. These characteristics made them both valuable as domestic animals and challenging to control. The earliest evidence for pig management appears around 8,500 BC in the Near East, with sites like Tel Es Salwan in Iraq containing pig remains showing modified age and sex profiles. However, pig domestication may have occurred independently in multiple regions, including China, where archaeological evidence from sites like Jiahu suggests local domestication of Asian wild boar around 8,000 BC. The process involves selecting for reduced aggression, modified snout length, and altered coat coloration, with domestic pigs developing spotted or solid-coloured coats distinct from the uniform dark coloration of wild boar. The integration of domestic animals into human communities required fundamental changes in settlement organization and resource management strategies. Unlike plant cultivation, which could be managed through seasonal activities, animal husbandry demanded year-round attention and substantial investments in infrastructure. Archaeological sites from this period show evidence of specialized animal housing, including stone-built pens, shelters, and feeding areas designed to accommodate different species requirements. At Tel Ramad in Syria, excavations have revealed complex arrangements of stone-walled enclosures associated with residential areas, suggesting that animals were kept in close proximity to human habitations. These facilities included drainage systems to manage animal waste, storage areas for fodder, and water management systems to provide reliable drinking sources. The construction of such infrastructure represented significant labour investments and demonstrated long-term commitments to animal husbandry. The development of pastoral nomadism emerged as communities recognised the potential for exploiting marginal environments unsuitable for agriculture through mobile animal husbandry. The steppes of Central Asia, the highlands of Iran and Anatolia, and the semi-arid regions of the Levant provided extensive grasslands that could support large herds of sheep, goats, and cattle. Archaeological evidence from sites like Tepe Sarab in Iran shows seasonal occupation patterns consistent with pastoral mobility, with communities moving their animals between summer and winter grazing areas. Pastoral societies developed sophisticated knowledge of animal behaviour, grassland ecology, and seasonal movement patterns. They understood the nutritional requirements of different species, the carrying capacity of various environments, and the optimal timing for breeding, birthing, and weaning activities. This knowledge was transmitted through oral traditions and practical training, creating specialised pastoral cultures with distinct identities and social organisations. The genetic changes accompanying animal domestication were as significant as the morphological modifications visible in archaeological remains. Domestic animals developed altered stress responses, modified reproductive cycles, and changed behavioural patterns that made them more suitable for human management. These changes often involved the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood, a phenomenon known as neoteny, which made adult animals more tractable and responsive to human direction. Sheep domestication involved significant modifications to wool production, with domestic varieties developing continuous wool growth rather than the seasonal hair changes characteristic of wild mouflon. This change required human intervention for shearing, making the animals dependent upon their human partners for comfort and health. Archaeological evidence from sites like Tel Es-Sarwan includes specialized tools for wool processing, including combs, spindles, and weaving equipment that demonstrate the integration of wool production into textile manufacturing systems. Cattle domestication produced animals with modified lactation patterns, allowing for milk production beyond the natural weaning period of calves. This development created opportunities for dairy production, providing communities with renewable protein sources that did not require killing animals. Archaeological evidence for early dairy production includes specialized pottery vessels with perforated bottoms used for cheese making and lipid residue analysis, showing milk fats in ceramic containers from sites like Catalhoyuk. The coevolution of humans and domestic animals created mutual dependencies that fundamentally altered both species' evolutionary trajectories. Humans developed lactose tolerance in adult populations that relied heavily on dairy products, while domestic animals evolved increased dependence on human care and protection. This relationship created stable partnerships that could persist across generations and geographic regions. Regional variations in domestication practices reflected local environmental conditions, available wild species, and cultural preferences. In the Andes Mountains of South America, indigenous communities began domesticating llamas and alpacas around 6000 BC, utilizing these camelids for transportation, fiber production, and meat. The high-altitude environment of the Andes presented unique challenges for animal husbandry, including extreme temperature variations, low oxygen levels, and limited vegetation diversity. Llama and alpaca domestication involved selecting wild vicunas and guanacos for increased size, modified fiber characteristics, and enhanced load-bearing capabilities. Archaeological evidence from sites like Telamachai in Peru shows the gradual development of camelid herding, with faunal assemblages indicating systematic management of herd composition and age structure. The animals' adaptation to high-altitude environments made them invaluable for transportation across mountain terrain and for accessing resources unavailable to other domestic species. In Southeast Asia, communities developed water buffalo domestication around 7000 BC, utilizing these large bovines for rice cultivation in wetland environments. Wild water buffalo inhabited marshy areas and river valleys, possessing behaviors and physical adaptations suited to aquatic environments. Their large size, strength, and comfort in wet conditions made them ideal for ploughing flooded rice fields and other agricultural tasks requiring substantial power. The domestication of water buffalo involved selecting for increased docility, modified horn configurations, and enhanced working capabilities. Archaeological sites in Thailand and Vietnam contain evidence of early buffalo management, including specialized handling equipment and modified settlement layouts designed to accommodate large working animals. The integration of water buffalo into rice cultivation systems created highly productive agricultural complexes that could support dense human populations. These regional variations in animal domestication demonstrate the adaptive flexibility of human communities in utilizing available biological resources. Each domestication event required detailed understanding of local species behaviors, ecological requirements, and potential utility for human societies. The success of these efforts depended upon sustained breeding programs, sophisticated animal handling techniques, and the development of supporting infrastructure and social institutions. The sophisticated animal husbandry systems that had emerged across multiple regions by 7000 BC created new demands for technological innovation that would fundamentally transform human material culture. As communities developed increasingly complex relationships with domestic animals and refined agricultural practices, they required new tools, storage systems, and processing techniques to manage their expanding resource base effectively. This period witnessed revolutionary developments in pottery production, textile manufacturing, early metallurgy, and craft specialization that would establish technological foundations persisting for millennia. The revolution in ceramic technology during this millennium represented one of humanity's most significant material innovations. Though pottery production had appeared much earlier in East Asia, around 20,000 BC among hunter-gatherer societies of the Jomon culture in Japan. These early Japanese ceramics, characterized by cord-marked surfaces and elaborate decorative schemes, served primarily ritualistic and seasonal food processing functions, rather than the storage-oriented purposes that would drive pottery development in agricultural societies. The Jomon potters developed sophisticated firing techniques, using open fires and constructed kilns, creating vessels with complex forms, including deep cooking pots, shallow serving bowls, and specialized ritual containers decorated with intricate rope patterns and applied ornamental elements. However, the ceramic revolution of the 7th millennium BC in agricultural societies of the Near East and Europe involved fundamentally different technological approaches and functional requirements. Communities like those at Jarmo in Iraq and Çatalhöyük in Turkey developed pottery production systems specifically designed to meet the storage, cooking, and processing needs of sedentary agricultural societies managing substantial food surpluses. These ceramics required different clay preparation techniques, firing methods, and vessel forms optimized for grain storage, liquid containment, and food preparation activities. The technical challenges of pottery production demanded sophisticated understanding of clay mineralogy, temper selection, and firing chemistry. Early potters learned to identify suitable clay deposits, typically found in river valleys and lake margins, where fine-grained sediments accumulated over geological time periods. These clays required careful preparation, involving weathering, crushing, and mixing with organic or mineral tempers to prevent cracking during drying and firing. Archaeological analysis of ceramic sherds from sites like Tellus Sauvan reveals the use of various tempering materials, including chopped straw, sand, crushed shell, and ground pottery sherds from previous firings. The construction techniques employed by early potters varied considerably across different regions and cultural traditions. Coil-building methods, involving the spiral construction of vessel walls using clay ropes, provided structural strength and allowed for the creation of large storage containers capable of holding hundreds of litres of grain or liquid. Slab construction techniques, using flattened clay sheets joined at edges and reinforced with additional clay, enabled the production of rectangular vessels and specialized forms like bread ovens and brewing vats. Hand modeling approaches allowed for the creation of smaller vessels with complex shapes and decorative elements. Firing technology represented perhaps the most critical aspect of ceramic production, requiring precise control of temperature, atmosphere, and timing to achieve durable, functional vessels. Early potters developed open firing techniques using wood, dung or straw as fuel sources, carefully arranging vessels in shallow pits or on surface fires to ensure even heat distribution. These fires typically reached temperatures between 600 and 800 degrees Celsius, sufficient to drive off remaining moisture and initiate the chemical changes that transformed clay into ceramic material. The development of more sophisticated firing techniques included the construction of simple kilns using stone or clay walls to contain heat and control airflow. Archaeological excavations at Dabbaghir in Iraq have revealed kiln structures dating to approximately 6,500 BC, featuring fire chambers connected to firing areas through draft channels that improved temperature control and fuel efficiency. These installations allowed potters to achieve higher temperatures and more consistent results while reducing fuel consumption and firing time. Surface treatments and decorative techniques demonstrated the artistic sophistication of early ceramic traditions while serving functional purposes related to vessel performance and cultural identity. Burnishing techniques, involving the rubbing of leather-hard clay surfaces with smooth stones or bone tools, created dense, water-resistant surfaces ideal for liquid storage. Slip application, using fine clay suspensions coloured with mineral pigments, provided decorative effects while improving vessel durability and reducing porosity. Painted decoration became increasingly elaborate during this period, with potters developing sophisticated pigment preparation techniques using iron oxides, manganese compounds, and organic materials to create red, black, brown, and cream-coloured paints. The Hassuna culture of northern Mesopotamia produced ceramics with intricate geometric patterns applied using brushes made from animal hair or plant fibres. These decorative schemes often carried symbolic meanings related to community identity, ritual practices, or seasonal cycles, creating visual languages that communicated cultural information across generations. The functional applications of pottery extended far beyond simple storage and cooking vessels to include specialized forms designed for specific technological processes. Large storage jars, some exceeding 2 meters in height and capable of containing over 1,000 liters, provided secure grain storage that protected agricultural surpluses from rodents, insects, and moisture. These vessels featured narrow necks that could be sealed with clay stoppers or organic covers, while their pointed bases allowed for easy insertion into storage pits or support structures. Cooking vessels developed distinctive forms optimized for different food preparation techniques. Round-bottom pots with wide mouths facilitated stirring and served effectively for boiling grains and stews, while flat-bottom pans provided optimal heat distribution for bread baking and meat roasting. Specialized brewing vessels, identified through residue analysis, showing evidence of fermented beverages, featured internal strainers and pouring spouts designed for beer or wine production. The Jiahu site in China has yielded pottery vessels containing chemical residues of fermented rice, honey, and fruit beverages dating to approximately 7,000 BC. Ritual and ceremonial ceramics represented another important category of pottery production, with communities creating specialized vessels for religious practices, burial customs, and community gatherings. These objects often displayed exceptional craftsmanship and decorative elaboration, suggesting production by skilled specialists rather than household potters. The figurines and ritual vessels from Catalhoyuk include elaborate goddess figures, animal representations, and ceremonial containers decorated with complex symbolic motifs that provide insights into early religious and social practices. The advancement of textile production during this period paralleled ceramic innovations in complexity and technological sophistication. While the basic principles of fiber processing and thread production had been established during earlier periods, the 7th millennium BC witnessed revolutionary developments in loom weaving, felt production, and the systematic processing of both plant and animal fibers. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and Asia demonstrates the emergence of specialized textile production centers, where skilled craftspeople developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for creating complex fabrics. Loom weaving technology underwent fundamental innovations that dramatically expanded the range of possible textile products. The development of the vertical warp-weighted loom, evidenced by numerous clay loom weights found at sites like Sesklo in Greece, allowed weavers to create large, complex textiles with consistent thread tension and intricate pattern work. These looms featured vertical wooden frames supporting warp threads held taut by carefully calibrated clay weights, while horizontal weft threads were inserted using wooden shuttles and beaten into place with bone or wooden beaters. The loom weights themselves demonstrate remarkable standardization and technical sophistication, with examples from individual sites showing consistent weights and forms that indicate systematic production methods. Analysis of loom weights from Catalhoyuk reveals that weavers use different weight categories for different thread types, with heavier weights employed for coarse wool threads and lighter weights used for fine linen fibres. The positioning and spacing of weights on archaeological looms suggests that early weavers understood complex relationships between thread tension, fabric density, and pattern formation. Felt production represented another significant textile innovation, utilizing the natural properties of wool fibers to create dense, water-resistant fabrics without weaving. This technique involved the controlled matting of wool fibers through combinations of moisture, heat, and mechanical pressure that caused the microscopic scales on wool fibers to interlock permanently. Archaeological evidence for felt production includes specialized tools like wooden mallets and stone pressing surfaces, along with felt fragments preserved in waterlogged deposits at sites like Catalhoyuk. The processing of plant fibers underwent substantial technological advancement as communities developed sophisticated techniques for extracting, preparing, and spinning fibers from flax, hemp, and other plants. Flax processing required complex sequences of operations, including retting, breaking, scutching, and heckling. Archaeological evidence from lakeside settlements in Switzerland includes wooden tools specifically designed for each stage of flax processing, demonstrating the technical complexity of linen production. The development of specialized spinning techniques enabled the production of threads with varying characteristics suited to different textile applications. Drop spindles, consisting of wooden shafts weighted with clay or stone whorls, allowed spinners to create threads of consistent diameter and twist. Analysis of spindle whorls from sites like Jarmo reveals that early spinners used different whorl weights for different fibre types, with heavy whorls employed for coarse wool and lighter whorls used for fine plant fibres. The standardization of spindle whorl forms within individual sites suggests specialized production by skilled craftspeople. Animal fibre processing advanced significantly as communities developed techniques for harvesting, cleaning, and preparing wool from domestic sheep and goats. The annual shearing of sheep required specialized bronze or flint cutting tools, while the subsequent cleaning and preparation of wool involved washing, carding, and sorting fibres according to quality and intended use. Archaeological evidence from pastoral sites includes bone and wooden combs designed for wool preparation, along with ceramic vessels used for washing and dyeing fibres. The beginnings of metallurgical technology during this period marks humanity's first systematic exploitation of metal resources, initially through the cold hammering of native copper and gradually advancing to smelting techniques that would revolutionize tool production. Native copper, occurring naturally in pure metallic form in certain geological contexts, provided early metal workers with malleable material that could be shaped through hammering without requiring high-temperature processing. The Kayonu site in Turkey has yielded some of the earliest evidence for copperworking, with hammered copper beads, pins, and small tools dating to approximately 7,200 BC. The initial exploitation of native copper involved collecting surface specimens and small nuggets from copper-bearing rock formations, particularly in regions like Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Great Lakes region of North America, where geological processes had concentrated pure copper deposits. These natural copper sources were limited in quantity and distribution, requiring early metal workers to develop techniques for maximizing the utility of available raw materials. Cold hammering techniques involved the systematic deformation of copper through repeated striking with stone hammers, gradually shaping the metal into desired forms while work hardening the material to increase its strength and durability. Archaeological analysis of early copper artifacts reveals sophisticated understanding of metal properties and working techniques. Microscopic examination of hammered copper objects shows evidence of annealing, controlled heating to relieve internal stresses and restore malleability, suggesting that early metal workers understood the relationship between heat treatment and metal properties. The presence of specialized hammering tools, including stone anvils and carefully shaped hammerstones, indicates the development of dedicated metalworking toolkits optimized for copper processing. The transition from cold working to smelting represented a revolutionary advancement that required understanding of high-temperature chemistry and the development of specialized furnace technology. The earliest smelting experiments appear to have involved the accidental or intentional heating of copper-bearing minerals in pottery kilns or specialized furnaces, leading to the discovery that certain green and blue copper minerals could be converted into metallic copper through controlled heating in reducing atmospheres. The Belovod site in Serbia contains some of the earliest evidence for copper smelting, with furnace remains and copper slag dating to approximately 6,500 BC. These installations featured stone-lined fire chambers connected to bellows systems that provided the controlled airflow necessary for achieving and maintaining the temperatures required for copper extraction. The furnaces were carefully designed to create reducing atmospheres that prevented copper oxidation while facilitating the separation of metallic copper from ore minerals. Tool specialization emerged as a defining characteristic of this period, reflecting both technological advancement and increasing economic complexity within Neolithic communities. The diversification of tool forms and functions demonstrates sophisticated understanding of materials, science, ergonomics, and task-specific requirements that enabled communities to perform increasingly complex operations with greater efficiency and precision. Archaeological assemblages from sites like Tel Essaouan and Catalhoyuk contain hundreds of distinct tool types, each optimized for particular functions within the expanding technological repertoire of agricultural societies. Stone tool production achieved unprecedented levels of sophistication through the development of pressure flaking techniques that allowed knappers to create extremely thin, sharp blades with precisely controlled edge geometries. These techniques involved the systematic removal of small flakes using pointed pressure tools made from antler, bone, or hardwood, enabling the production of razor-sharp cutting edges and complex tool forms. The obsidian tools from Catalhoyuk demonstrate remarkable craftsmanship, with some blades measuring less than 2 mm in thickness, while maintaining straight, sharp edges over lengths exceeding 15 cm. The emergence of craft specialization within Neolithic communities represented a fundamental shift in economic organization that enabled unprecedented levels of technological innovation and artistic achievement. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites demonstrates the presence of individuals who devoted substantial portions of their time to specific craft activities, developing specialized skills and producing goods that exceeded the capabilities of household-level production. These specialists created products that were traded across considerable distances, establishing economic networks that connected communities across hundreds of kilometers. Pottery specialists developed techniques and artistic styles that distinguished their work from household pottery production, creating vessels with exceptional technical quality and decorative sophistication. The ceramics from specialized workshops at sites like Dabakia display consistent technical standards, standardized forms, and complex decorative schemes that suggest production by individuals with extensive training and experience. These specialists appear to have controlled access to high-quality clay sources, specialised firing facilities, and rare pigments used for decorative applications. Textile specialists working alongside pottery, craftspeople established production centres that would serve as catalysts for the most dramatic transformation in human settlement patterns since the adoption of agriculture itself. The accumulated technological innovations of the preceding millennia, sophisticated ceramic production, advanced textile manufacturing, early metallurgy, and specialised tool production created the foundation for unprecedented concentrations of human population and the emergence of complex urban centres that would redefine the relationship between individuals, communities, and the landscape. Çatalhöyük in central Anatolia stands as the most remarkable example of early urban development, representing a quantum leap in settlement size, social complexity, and architectural sophistication. Occupied continuously from approximately 7,500 to 6,400 BC, this site supported a population estimated between 3,000 and 8,000 individuals at its peak, making it one of the largest human settlements in existence at that time. The site's 13 hectares contained densely packed rectangular houses constructed using standardized mud brick techniques, with structures built directly against one another to create a honeycomb-like urban fabric that maximized land use efficiency while providing structural stability. The architectural organization of Çatalhöyük reflected entirely new approaches to urban planning and community organization. Unlike earlier settlements, where houses were typically arranged around central courtyards or plazas, Çatalhöyük featured a continuous building mass with no ground-level streets or pathways. Residents accessed their homes through roof openings connected by wooden ladders, creating a three-dimensional circulation system that utilized rooftops as the primary pedestrian network. This unusual arrangement provided several practical advantages. It maximized usable interior space, created defensive advantages by eliminating easily accessible entrances, and facilitated waste management through the disposal of refuse into abandoned rooms that were subsequently filled and built over. Individual houses at Çatalhöyük displayed remarkable standardization in size and internal organization, typically measuring 4 by 5 meters and featuring consistent arrangements of hearths, storage areas, and sleeping platforms. The main living areas contained raised platforms along the walls that served multiple functions as seating, sleeping areas, and work surfaces. These platforms were constructed using carefully laid mud brick foundations covered with lime plaster that was renewed regularly, creating smooth, clean surfaces suitable for domestic activities. Beneath these platforms, residents buried their dead in flexed positions wrapped in textiles and accompanied by personal possessions including obsidian tools, bone ornaments, and ceramic vessels. The interior walls of houses featured elaborate decorative schemes that combined painted plaster, relief sculptures, and carefully arranged animal skulls and horns. Wall paintings depicted complex scenes including geometric patterns, human figures, animals, and what appear to be landscape views of the surrounding volcanic terrain. The famous hunting scene murals show groups of human figures surrounding large animals, possibly aurochs or deer, rendered in sophisticated compositions that demonstrate advanced artistic capabilities. Three-dimensional wall reliefs featured leopards, bears, and vultures modelled in clay and painted with mineral pigments, creating dramatic focal points within domestic spaces. The concentration of specialised craft production at Çatalhöyük reached levels unprecedented in earlier settlements, with archaeological evidence indicating the presence of full-time specialists producing goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Obsidian tool production represented the site's most significant industry, utilising volcanic glass from nearby sources at Hasan Dağ and Golu Dağ volcanoes. The quality of Çatalhöyük obsidian tools was exceptional, with pressure-flaked blades achieving sharpness comparable to modern surgical instruments, while maintaining durability superior to contemporary flint implements. The obsidian workshops at Catalhoyuk contained specialised toolkits, including pressure flakers made from carefully shaped antler tines, stone anvils for supporting workpieces, and leather pads for protecting hands during knapping operations. Analysis of production debris reveals highly systematic reduction sequences designed to maximise blade production from individual obsidian cores while minimising waste. The most skilled knappers could produce over 100 usable blades from a single large core, representing remarkable efficiency in raw material utilisation. Textile production at Catalhoyuk achieved extraordinary sophistication, with preserved fabric fragments demonstrating complex weaving techniques and sophisticated dyeing methods. The site's inhabitants produced textiles using both wool from domestic sheep and plant fibres from wild and cultivated sources. Microscopic analysis of textile remains reveals the use of multiple fibre types within individual fabrics, creating materials with varying properties suited to different applications. Some textiles display evidence of complex pattern weaving using multiple colours, suggesting the use of sophisticated loom technologies and advanced planning of decorative schemes. The social organisation necessary to coordinate such complex craft production and maintain urban infrastructure required new forms of leadership and decision-making processes. Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of social hierarchies based on craft specialisation, trade relationships, and possibly ritual authority. Some houses at Catalhoyuk contained significantly more elaborate decorative schemes, larger storage facilities, and greater quantities of exotic goods, indicating differential access to resources and status markers. However, the overall similarity in house sizes and basic architectural features suggests that social stratification remained relatively limited compared to later urban societies. The defensive architecture that emerged during this period represented responses to increasing competition for resources and territory as population densities rose and agricultural land became more valuable. The massive stone walls and towers at pre-pottery Neolithic Jericho, constructed around 8000 BC, established architectural precedents that would be followed at numerous sites across the Fertile Crescent and beyond. These fortifications required coordinated labour, involving hundreds of individuals working over multiple construction seasons, demonstrating the ability of early urban communities to organise large-scale collective projects. The Jericho wall system consisted of stone foundations supporting mud brick superstructures that stood approximately 4 metres high and extended for over 600 metres around the settlement's perimeter. The wall incorporated several towers, including the famous circular tower that still stands 8.5 metres high, and contains an internal stone staircase providing access to the top. The construction techniques employed at Jericho involved quarrying large limestone blocks from nearby sources, transporting them to the construction site using wooden levers and rollers, and fitting them together using careful dry stone masonry techniques. Similar defensive systems appeared at sites across the Levant and Anatolia during the 7th and 6th millennia BC, indicating widespread concerns about security and territorial control. Tel Es-Sarwan in Iraq featured a defensive wall constructed around 6500 BC using mud brick techniques similar to those employed in domestic architecture, but on a much larger scale. The wall incorporated bastions and gates designed to control access to the settlement while providing defensive positions for archers and other defenders. Archaeological evidence suggests that these fortifications were maintained and rebuilt multiple times, indicating their continued importance for community security. The development of defensive architecture coincided with changes in settlement location preferences, with many communities choosing elevated positions that provided natural defensive advantages while maintaining access to agricultural land and water sources. Tel Halaf in Syria occupied a strategic position on a low hill overlooking the Khabur River Valley, providing excellent visibility of surrounding terrain while remaining accessible to fertile agricultural soils. The site's inhabitants constructed terrace defensive works that incorporated natural topographic features while adding artificial barriers where needed. Defensive considerations also influenced house construction techniques, with many settlements featuring houses built with thick walls, limited ground-level openings, and flat roofs that could serve as defensive platforms. At Bukhara in Syria, houses were constructed with walls exceeding 1 metre in thickness, far beyond structural requirements for normal domestic use. These walls contained internal chambers and passages that could provide secure storage for valuable goods while offering protected areas during conflicts. The rooftop access systems, typical of many sites during this period, served dual purposes as circulation routes and defensive positions. The evolution of house forms during this period reflected both practical improvements in construction techniques and changing social requirements as communities grew larger and more complex. The transition from circular to rectangular house plans represented a fundamental shift in architectural thinking that would influence building design for millennia to come. Rectangular structures offered several advantages over circular forms. They could be more easily expanded through the addition of new rooms, they made more efficient use of available space, and they could be joined together to create continuous building masses. The earliest rectangular houses appeared around 7,500 BC at sites like Kayonu in Turkey, where builders developed sophisticated techniques for constructing large, multi-room structures using stone foundations and mud brick walls. These buildings featured internal subdivisions that created specialized areas for different activities, including food preparation, craft production, storage, and sleeping. The room arrangements followed consistent patterns across different houses, suggesting the development of standardized architectural conventions that balanced functional requirements with cultural preferences. Storage facilities underwent dramatic expansion and technological improvement as communities needed to manage increasingly large agricultural surpluses and craft production inventories. The development of large ceramic storage vessels capable of containing hundreds of litres represented one solution to storage challenges, but communities also constructed specialised storage buildings and underground facilities designed to protect valuable goods from theft, fire, and environmental damage. At Tel Es-Sarwan, archaeologists have identified storage buildings containing dozens of large ceramic jars arranged in systematic patterns that facilitated inventory management and access control. Underground storage facilities became increasingly sophisticated, with some sites featuring elaborate systems of interconnected chambers carved into bedrock or constructed using stone masonry techniques. These installations provided secure, climate-controlled environments ideal for preserving grain, textiles, and other perishable goods over extended periods. The Sha'ar Hagalan site in Israel contains underground storage chambers with plastered walls and carefully fitted stone covers that created nearly airtight seals, protecting contents from moisture and pests. The technological innovations in storage extended to the development of specialized containers and preservation techniques that maximize the utility of stored goods. Large ceramic pithoi, some exceeding 2 meters in height, were designed with narrow necks that could be sealed with clay stoppers or organic covers. These vessels were often partially buried in floors or courtyards to provide additional temperature stability while remaining accessible for regular use. The interior surfaces were sometimes lined with bitumen or other waterproof materials to prevent moisture penetration and contamination. Trade networks during this period achieved unprecedented geographical scope and organizational complexity, connecting communities across thousands of kilometers through systematic exchange relationships that moved both utilitarian goods and luxury items. The obsidian trade represents the most thoroughly documented of these networks, with volcanic glass from Anatolian sources reaching sites throughout the Levant, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Chemical analysis of obsidian artifacts allows archaeologists to trace specific pieces back to their geological sources, revealing the routes and mechanisms through which these materials moved across the landscape. The Siflik obsidian source in central Anatolia supplied communities across a radius of over 1,000 kilometers, with finished tools and raw materials reaching sites in Syria, Iraq, and the Levant through complex distribution networks. The consistency of tool forms and production techniques across this vast area suggests the existence of specialized trading partnerships and possibly itinerant craftspeople who maintain technical standards while adapting to local preferences and requirements. Some sites contain obsidian tool production areas with debris patterns indicating the presence of visiting specialists who produce tools using imported raw materials. Jade and other precious stone materials move through similar long-distance networks, with sources in Central Asia supplying communities across Europe and the Near East. The Varna culture of Bulgaria, flourishing around 5,500 BC, produced some of the world's earliest elaborate gold ornaments, while maintaining trade connections that brought jade, copper, and other exotic materials from sources hundreds of kilometers away. The technical sophistication of Varna metalwork, including complex gold diadems and ceremonial axes, demonstrates advanced understanding of metallurgical techniques and artistic design principles. The organization of these trade networks required sophisticated social institutions capable of maintaining relationships across cultural and linguistic boundaries, while ensuring the reliable flow of goods over long distances and extended time periods. Archaeological evidence suggests the development of standardized exchange rates, quality control mechanisms, and dispute resolution procedures that enabled trade relationships to persist despite the challenges of prehistoric communication and transportation systems. Some sites contain what appear to be trading posts or neutral meeting places where representatives from different communities could conduct business safely. The emergence of specialized trading communities represented another significant development, with some settlements appearing to focus primarily on the production and exchange of particular goods rather than subsistence agriculture. The spondylus shell trade, which moved marine shells from the Mediterranean and Black Sea coasts to inland communities across Europe, appears to have been controlled by specialized trading groups who maintained processing centers and distribution networks spanning the continent. These shells were converted into ornaments, ritual objects, and status symbols that played important roles in the social and religious life of early agricultural communities. The extensive trade networks and specialized craft production centers that had emerged by 6000 BC created unprecedented opportunities for individuals and groups to accumulate wealth, control resources, and exercise influence over their communities. This period witnessed the crystallization of social hierarchies that had been developing gradually during preceding millennia, manifesting most clearly through increasingly elaborate burial practices that reflected differential access to material goods, exotic objects, and specialized services. The archaeological record from this era reveals stark contrasts between simple interments containing few or no grave goods and spectacular burials accompanied by hundreds of precious objects, indicating the emergence of distinct social classes with vastly different levels of wealth and status. The Varna cemetery in Bulgaria, dating to approximately 4,200 BC, provides the most dramatic evidence for early social stratification in the archaeological record. Grave 43, containing the remains of a middle-aged male, included over 990 gold objects with a combined weight exceeding 1.5 kilograms, more gold than had been discovered in all other contemporary sites combined. The burial assemblage featured a massive gold diadem, gold-handled stone axes, gold-sheathed wooden staffs, and hundreds of gold appliques that had been sewn onto clothing or burial shrouds. The technical sophistication of these objects demonstrates advanced metallurgical skills, including techniques for creating thin gold sheet, complex repoussé decoration, and precise soldering of multiple components. The contrast between elite burials, like Varna 43, and contemporary simple graves within the same cemetery reveals the extent of social differentiation that had developed by the 5th millennium BC. While wealthy individuals were interred with elaborate gold ornaments, copper tools, imported spondylus shell ornaments, and fine ceramic vessels, the majority of burials contained only basic pottery vessels and simple stone tools. Some graves contained no artifacts whatsoever, suggesting the presence of individuals who lacked access to material wealth, or whose social status did not warrant elaborate mortuary treatment. This pattern of differential burial treatment appears across multiple sites throughout southeastern Europe, indicating widespread acceptance of social hierarchies based on wealth accumulation and status differentiation. The Tisa culture of Hungary and Serbia developed similar patterns of elite burial during this same period, with wealthy individuals interred in elaborate graves containing copper axes, gold ornaments, and imported exotic materials. The Tisapolga cemetery revealed burials with copper shaft-hole axes weighing over 2 kilograms, representing substantial investments in both raw materials and skilled craftsmanship. These axes required sophisticated casting techniques involving two-piece molds and precise temperature control to achieve the complex internal geometries necessary for hafting. The presence of such objects in graves indicates their primary function as status symbols rather than utilitarian tools, as their weight and decoration made them impractical for actual use. Grave goods distribution patterns reveal not only individual wealth differences, but also the emergence of hereditary status transmission, with children buried alongside valuable objects that they could not have earned through personal achievement. At the Durankulac cemetery in Bulgaria, infant burials dating to 5500 BC contained gold beads, copper ornaments, and imported shell objects, indicating that high status was inherited rather than achieved through individual accomplishment. The quantity and quality of grave goods in these child burials often exceeded those found with adults in the same cemetery, suggesting that some families had achieved such elevated status that even their youngest members warranted elaborate mortuary treatment. The development of specialized mortuary architecture accompanied increasingly elaborate burial practices, with elite individuals interred in constructed tombs that required substantial labor investments and architectural expertise. The megalithic passage tombs of Western Europe, beginning around 5500 BC, represent massive communal undertakings that served as burial places for successive generations of high-status individuals. Newgrange in Ireland, constructed around 5200 BC, required an estimated 200,000 tons of stone transported from quarries up to 80 kilometres away, along with sophisticated engineering to create the corbelled roof structure that has remained watertight for over 5,000 years. The internal organisation of passage tombs reflects complex social hierarchies within elite groups, with different chambers and areas designated for individuals of varying status levels. The main burial chamber at Newgrange contained cremated remains of multiple individuals, along with elaborate grave goods, including carved stone balls, bone pins, and ceramic vessels. Secondary chambers contained fewer grave goods and appeared to serve as burial places for individuals of somewhat lower status, possibly family members or retainers of the primary occupants. The careful segregation of burial areas suggests sophisticated protocols governing mortuary practices and the posthumous treatment of different social classes. Specialized roles emerged within these increasingly stratified communities as population growth and economic complexity created demands for individuals with specific skills and knowledge. Craft specialists achieved new levels of technical sophistication while developing distinct professional identities that set them apart from agricultural producers. The copper smiths of the Balkans during this period possessed specialized knowledge of ore sources, smelting techniques, and alloying procedures that required years of training and experience to master. Archaeological evidence from sites like Aybunar in Bulgaria reveals mining operations that extracted copper ore from underground shafts extending over 10 meters below ground level, requiring sophisticated understanding of geology, structural engineering, and ventilation systems. The technical complexity of copper production during this period involved multiple specialized roles, including miners who extracted ore from underground workings, smelters who processed raw materials in high-temperature furnaces, and smiths who shaped finished objects using hammering and casting techniques. Each stage required different skill sets and equipment, creating opportunities for individuals to develop expertise in particular aspects of the production process. The Rudna Glava mine in Serbia contains evidence of systematic copper extraction involving the construction of underground galleries, ventilation shafts, and waste disposal areas that demonstrate sophisticated mining engineering adapted to local geological conditions. Pottery specialists achieved unprecedented levels of artistic and technical sophistication, developing regional styles that combined functional excellence with elaborate decorative schemes. The Cucuteni Tripilian culture of Ukraine and Romania produced ceramics with complex polychrome designs executed using multiple firing techniques and sophisticated pigment preparation methods. These vessels required specialized knowledge of clay preparation, firing atmospheres, and decorative application techniques that exceeded the capabilities of household-level production. The consistency of decorative motifs across sites separated by hundreds of kilometers suggests the existence of specialist potters who traveled between communities or maintained long-distance training relationships. Ritual practitioners emerged as another distinct specialist category, developing complex ceremonial knowledge and maintaining responsibility for community religious activities. The elaborate ritual deposits found at sites like the Despilio settlement in Greece contain carefully arranged assemblages of ceramic figurines, miniature tools, and organic materials that suggest systematic ritual practices conducted by individuals with specialized knowledge. These deposits often include rare or exotic materials obtained through long-distance trade, indicating that ritual specialists had access to valuable resources and maintained connections with distant communities. The emergence of leadership classes during this period reflected the need for coordination and decision-making in increasingly complex communities, managing diverse economic activities, trade relationships, and social institutions. Archaeological evidence suggests the development of institutionalized leadership roles that combined economic, military, and ritual authority within individual positions. The chieftain burials found across Europe during this period typically contain combinations of weapons, tools, ornaments, and ritual objects that reflect the multiple responsibilities and sources of authority associated with leadership positions. The Lepensky Vir culture along the Danube River developed distinctive leadership patterns reflected in the differential treatment of houses and burials within their settlements. House 54 at Lepensky Vir contained elaborate stone sculptures, imported materials, and architectural features not found in other structures, suggesting it served as the residence of a high-status individual or family. The associated burials contained copper tools, shell ornaments, and ceramic vessels of exceptional quality, indicating access to specialized craft production and long-distance trade networks. The positioning of this house at the center of the settlement, with other structures arranged around it in concentric patterns, suggests its occupants held central roles in community organization and decision-making. Organized labor projects became increasingly common during this period, as communities undertook massive construction efforts that required coordinated planning, resource mobilization, and workforce management. The causewayed enclosures of Neolithic Britain represent some of the most impressive examples of collective labour organisation, with sites like Windmill Hill in Wiltshire requiring the excavation of over 7,000 cubic metres of chalk using antler picks and wooden shovels. The construction involved creating multiple concentric ditches separated by earthen causeways, with the spoil used to build internal banks that enhanced the enclosure's visual impact and possibly their defensive capabilities. The organisation of causewayed enclosure construction required sophisticated planning and coordination, involving multiple communities working together over extended periods. Archaeological evidence suggests that different sections of the earthworks were constructed by separate groups, possibly representing different settlements or kinship groups, contributing to the collective effort. The variation in construction techniques and tool types found in different sections supports this interpretation, indicating that each group brought their own equipment and methods while working toward the common goal of completing the enclosure. Long barrow construction in Western Europe represented another category of organised labour project that required substantial community investment and coordination. The West Kennet Long Barrow in England, measuring 100 metres in length and containing multiple burial chambers constructed using massive sarsen stones, required an estimated 15,700 person-hours of labour to complete. The project involved quarrying and transporting stones, weighing up to 40 tonnes, excavating foundation trenches, and constructing sophisticated dry stone masonry chambers capable of supporting enormous loads. The technical expertise required for such construction suggests the involvement of specialised architects or engineers who possessed advanced knowledge of structural principles and construction techniques. The earthen long barrows of northern Europe required different but equally impressive organisational capabilities, with some monuments containing over 5,000 cubic metres of soil and stone carefully arranged to create stable, long-lasting structures. The construction process involves systematic soil collection from designated areas, transportation to the construction site using baskets or hide containers, and careful placement according to predetermined architectural plans. The presence of wooden chambers and passages within these monuments required additional skills in timber construction, including the selection of appropriate tree species, seasoning of wood, and joinery techniques for creating durable underground structures. Evidence for intergroup conflict and warfare became increasingly prominent during this period as competition intensified for agricultural land, trade routes, and natural resources. The appearance of specialised weapons designed specifically for human combat, rather than hunting, indicates that organised violence had become a regular feature of social life. The copper and bronze axes found in elite burials often displayed damage patterns consistent with use as weapons rather than tools, with blade edges showing the characteristic nicks and deformation associated with striking hard targets like bone or metal. Fortification construction accelerated dramatically during the 5th millennium BC, as communities invested increasing resources in defensive architecture designed to protect against human attackers rather than wild animals. The hill fort at Hambledon Hill in England featured multiple defensive circuits, with elaborate entrance systems designed to channel attackers through killing zones where defenders could concentrate their fire. The site's inhabitants constructed timber palisades reinforced with stone foundations, along with deep ditches that created additional obstacles for approaching enemies. Archaeological evidence includes numerous arrowheads embedded in the defensive structures, indicating that the site experienced actual combat rather than serving merely as a deterrent. Traumatic skeletal evidence provides direct documentation of interpersonal violence during this period, with many cemetery populations showing high frequencies of healed and unhealed injuries consistent with weapons trauma. The Talheim death pit in Germany contains the remains of 34 individuals who died simultaneously from head injuries inflicted by stone axes and adzes, representing one of the earliest documented massacres in European prehistory. The age and sex distribution of the victims, including men, women and children, suggests the destruction of an entire community, rather than selective targeting of warriors or other specific groups. The Offnet caves in Bavaria contained carefully arranged deposits of human skulls, many showing evidence of violent death through blunt force trauma to the head and face. The skulls were arranged in organised patterns and accompanied by shell ornaments and other grave goods, suggesting that the deaths resulted from organised raids or conflicts rather than random violence. The presence of both adult and juvenile remains indicates that warfare during this period involved entire communities rather than being limited to specialised warrior classes. Weapon development during this period reflected increasing specialisation for human combat, with new forms designed specifically for interpersonal violence rather than hunting or utilitarian purposes. The battle axes of the corded ware culture featured distinctive shapes optimised for penetrating human skulls and other body parts, with narrow blades and reinforced hafting systems that could withstand the stresses of repeated combat use. These weapons required specialised manufacturing techniques, including precise stone shaping, sophisticated hafting methods, and careful balance optimization to achieve maximum effectiveness in close combat situations. The emergence of archer warfare is documented through the appearance of specialised arrowhead types designed for maximum penetration and tissue damage when used against human targets. These points featured barbed edges and reinforced tips that would remain embedded in wounds while causing maximum trauma to victims. The standardization of arrowhead forms within particular regions suggests organised production by specialist weapon makers who understood the technical requirements for effective military equipment. Some sites contain evidence of mass production techniques involving the systematic manufacture of hundreds of identical arrowheads using standardized core reduction sequences. Defensive strategies evolved in response to changing military technologies and tactics, with communities developing increasingly sophisticated approaches to protection and conflict management. The construction of refugia, heavily fortified sites located in naturally defensive positions, provided communities with secure retreats during periods of heightened conflict. These sites typically featured multiple defensive circuits, secure water sources, and storage facilities capable of supporting large populations during extended sieges. The Maiden Castle hill fort in England ultimately grew to encompass over 19 hectares within its defensive perimeter, making it one of the largest fortified sites in prehistoric Europe. The sophisticated defensive systems and emerging social hierarchies that had crystallized across Europe by 4500 BC created the organizational capacity and cultural impetus for humanity's most ambitious architectural undertakings. As communities consolidated their territorial control and accumulated surplus resources through increasingly efficient agricultural systems, they began channeling unprecedented amounts of labour and materials into monumental construction projects that would fundamentally transform the landscape itself into a sacred geography. These megalithic monuments represented far more than impressive displays of engineering prowess. They embodied complex cosmological beliefs, served as focal points for community identity, and created enduring connections between the living and the dead that would influence human behaviour for millennia. The construction of massive stone monuments across Atlantic Europe during this period required organisational capabilities that exceeded even the most ambitious earlier projects. The Passage Tomb at Newgrange, completed around 3200 BC, involved the precise placement of over 200,000 tons of stone transported from quarries scattered across a radius of 80 kilometres. The builder selected specific rock types for different architectural elements: white quartz cobbles from the Wicklow Mountains for the exterior facade, granite boulders from the Mourne Mountains for structural elements, and local limestone for the corbelled roof construction. Each material choice reflected sophisticated understanding of stone properties, with the quartz providing brilliant reflective surfaces that made the monument visible from great distances, while the granite offered superior structural strength for load-bearing applications. The transportation of these massive stones across the Irish landscape required engineering solutions that pushed contemporary technology to its limits. Archaeological experiments have demonstrated that moving a single 40-ton capstone would have required teams of 200 people using wooden rollers, rope systems, and carefully constructed earthen ramps. The logistics of coordinating such operations across multiple quarry sites while maintaining construction schedules at Newgrange would have demanded sophisticated project management capabilities and the ability to mobilise labour forces from numerous communities across the region. Evidence from the monument's construction suggests that different groups were responsible for specific aspects of the work, with some specialising in quarrying, others in transportation, and still others in the precise stone fitting required for the passage and chamber construction. The technical achievements embodied in megalithic architecture demonstrate remarkable advances in structural engineering and astronomical observation. The corbelled roof at Newgrange rises 6 metres above the chamber floor, using carefully selected stones fitted together without mortar, in a technique that has kept the interior completely dry for over 5,000 years. The builders understood principles of load distribution and structural stability that allowed them to create self-supporting dome structures, capable of bearing enormous loads while maintaining architectural integrity across millennia. The precision required for this construction involved selecting stones with complementary shapes, calculating load paths through the structure, and executing the gradual inward curve of the corbelling with mathematical accuracy. Dolmens, the most widespread category of megalithic monuments, appeared across Atlantic Europe in remarkable numbers during the 4th millennium BC. These structures typically consisted of massive upright stones supporting equally impressive capstones, creating chamber spaces that served as collective burial facilities for successive generations. The Pulnabrona Dolmen in Ireland features a capstone weighing approximately 12 tons balanced on 3 upright supports, creating a chamber space that contained the remains of over 30 individuals, along with personal ornaments, pottery vessels, and stone tools accumulated over several centuries of use. The construction techniques employed in dolmen building reveal sophisticated understanding of leverage, balance, and stone placement that allowed relatively small work crews to manipulate stones weighing many tons. Archaeological evidence suggests that builders used combinations of earth ramps, wooden levers, and rope systems to raise capstones into position, often employing the upright stones themselves as fulcrum points for lever systems. The precision required to balance massive capstones on relatively narrow support points demanded careful calculation of weight distribution and centre of gravity, skills that were passed down through generations of monument builders. Menhirs, standing stones that could reach heights exceeding 20 metres and weights of over 300 tons, represented perhaps the most technically challenging megalithic constructions. The Grand Menhir Brice at Loch Mariaker in Brittany, now fallen and broken into 4 pieces, originally stood 20.6 metres high and weighed approximately 330 tons, making it one of the largest single stones ever erected by prehistoric peoples. The process of quarrying, transporting, and erecting such massive monoliths required engineering capabilities that approached the limits of what was possible using Neolithic technology. The quarrying techniques used to extract large menhirs involved systematic application of fire and water to exploit natural fracture planes in granite bedrock. Workers built fires against rock faces to heat the stone, then doused the heated areas with cold water to create thermal stress fractures that could be widened using wooden wedges and stone hammers. This process, repeated over many cycles, allowed quarrymen to separate massive blocks from living rock without the metal tools that would become available in later periods. The precision required to extract stones of predetermined sizes and shapes demonstrates remarkable understanding of rock mechanics and fracture propagation. Transportation of the largest menhirs across distances of several kilometres required the construction of specialised roadways and the development of sophisticated moving techniques. Archaeological evidence from Brittany includes stone-paved trackways that appear to have been constructed specifically for megalith transportation, featuring carefully graded surfaces and reinforced sections designed to support enormous loads. The moving process likely involved combinations of wooden rollers, earthen ramps and rope systems operated by teams of hundreds of individuals working in coordinated sequences. Stone circles, the most architecturally complex megalithic monuments, achieve their ultimate expression at Stonehenge, where construction occurred in multiple phases spanning over 1,500 years. The monument's final configuration, completed around 2500 BC, featured an outer circle of massive Sarsen trilithons, paired upright stones topped by horizontal lintels, surrounding an inner horseshoe of even larger trilithons arranged with precise astronomical alignments. The Sarsen stones, quarried from the Marlborough Downs approximately 30 kilometres away, were shaped using techniques that achieved remarkably precise fits between uprights and lintels, despite the stone's enormous size and weight. The shaping of Sarsen stones at Stonehenge involved systematic pecking with hard hammerstones to remove unwanted material and create the precise geometries required for architectural stability. The lintels were shaped with curved undersurfaces that matched the tops of their supporting uprights, while mortise and tenon joints provided additional structural connection between elements. This level of precision in stoneworking required sophisticated understanding of three-dimensional geometry and the ability to visualize complex spatial relationships while working with materials that allowed no margin for error. The smaller bluestones at Stonehenge, transported from the Preseli Mountains in Wales across a distance of 250 kilometres, represent one of the most remarkable transportation achievements in prehistoric Europe. These stones, weighing between 2 and 5 tons each, were moved across a landscape that included major rivers, hills, and marshlands using techniques that remain partially mysterious, despite extensive archaeological investigation. The most likely route involved combinations of overland transport using wooden rollers and sleds, river transport on specially constructed rafts, and coastal shipping along the Bristol Channel. The development of complex burial traditions during this period reflected increasingly sophisticated beliefs about death, ancestry, and the relationship between the living and the dead. Collective tombs became focal points for community identity, serving not only as burial places, but as centres for ritual activities that reinforced social bonds and transmitted cultural knowledge across generations. The 7 Cotswold Long Barrows of Western England typically contained burial chambers accessed through carefully constructed passages, with internal arrangements that segregated different categories of individuals according to age, sex, or social status. The burial practices documented within megalithic tombs reveal complex protocols governing the treatment of human remains and the transformation of individual deaths into collective ancestral heritage. At the West Kennet Long Barrow, excavations revealed that bodies were initially placed intact within the burial chambers, but the bones were subsequently rearranged and sorted according to systematic patterns that emphasized collective identity over individual commemoration. Skulls were often separated from other skeletal elements and arranged in special deposits, while long bones were sorted and stacked in organized patterns that created visual displays of ancestral presence. Secondary burial practices became increasingly elaborate during this period, with many communities developing sophisticated techniques for processing human remains and creating permanent displays of ancestral bones. The practice of excarnation, allowing bodies to decompose naturally before collecting the bones for final burial, appears to have been widespread across megalithic cultures. This process often occurred at specialized sites separate from the final burial locations, with bodies exposed on wooden platforms or in temporary structures until decomposition was complete. The curation of ancestral remains within megalithic monuments created opportunities for ongoing ritual interactions between the living and the dead that extended far beyond simple burial ceremonies. Archaeological evidence suggests that tomb chambers were regularly reopened for the addition of new burials, the rearrangement of existing remains, and the conduct of ceremonies that involved direct contact with ancestral bones. The presence of hearths, food remains, and ritual deposits within burial chambers indicates that these spaces served as venues for feasting, ceremony, and other activities that maintained active relationships with deceased community members. Ancestor veneration practices extended beyond the manipulation of human remains to include the creation of symbolic representations and the establishment of ritual protocols that governed interactions with ancestral spirits. The carved stone balls found in Scottish megalithic contexts appear to represent stylized human features or astronomical symbols that connected ancestral identities with cosmic forces. These objects, numbering in the hundreds and displaying remarkable artistic sophistication, were often deposited in burial contexts or ritual sites where they served as focal points for ceremonial activities. The astronomical alignments incorporated into megalithic architecture demonstrate sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles and their integration into ritual and agricultural calendars. The passage at Newgrange is precisely oriented to admit sunlight only during the winter solstice, when the rising sun shines directly down the 19-metre passage to illuminate the burial chamber for approximately 17 minutes. This alignment required careful planning during the monument's construction, with the passage angle calculated to account for the sun's position at the solstice and the desired illumination effect within the chamber. Similar astronomical orientations appear in megalithic monuments across Atlantic Europe, with many stone circles and passage tombs aligned to significant solar, lunar, or stellar events. The Callanish stone circle in Scotland incorporates multiple alignments that mark important positions of the moon during its 18.6-year cycle, while individual stones within the circle frame specific star rises that would have been visible to ancient observers. These alignments required sustained astronomical observation over multiple years or decades to identify the relevant celestial patterns and calculate the precise orientations needed for architectural implementation. The complexity of megalithic astronomical alignment suggests the presence of specialist astronomer priests who maintained detailed knowledge of celestial cycles and their ritual significance. These individuals would have been responsible for determining the proper timing of ceremonies, predicting eclipses and other astronomical events, and maintaining the calendrical systems that coordinated agricultural and social activities. The standardization of certain alignment patterns across wide geographical areas indicates that this astronomical knowledge was shared between communities through networks of specialist practitioners. Lunar observations appear to have been particularly important in megalithic astronomy, with many monuments incorporating alignments to the moon's maximum and minimum rising and setting positions during its complex cycle. The stone circles at Avebury include alignments that mark the moon's standstill positions, while the nearby sanctuary appears to have been designed as a lunar observatory where specialists could make precise measurements of the moon's changing positions throughout its cycle. These observations required sophisticated understanding of the relationship between lunar and solar cycles and their integration into unified calendrical systems. Sacred landscapes emerged during this period as communities began integrating natural features with human-made monuments to create comprehensive ritual environments that encompassed entire regions. The Orkney landscape around the Ring of Brodgar includes over 100 megalithic monuments arranged in patterns that reflect both practical considerations and symbolic relationships with topographic features. The positioning of monuments appears to have been coordinated to create sightlines between different sites, while incorporating prominent hills, water bodies, and other natural landmarks into unified ceremonial complexes. The Avebury landscape in Wiltshire represents perhaps the most sophisticated example of integrated ritual geography, with the massive stone circle connected to other monuments through a complex system of avenues, cursus monuments, and burial sites that extends across several square kilometres. The West Kennet Avenue, marked by paired standing stones, extending for 2.5 kilometres, created a processional route that connected Avebury with the sanctuary on Overton Hill, while passing numerous burial mounds and other ritual sites. The careful positioning of these elements created a sacred geography where movement between different locations followed prescribed routes that reinforce cosmological beliefs and community identity. The integration of water features into megalithic landscapes reflects beliefs about the sacred properties of springs, rivers, and lakes that connected the terrestrial world with supernatural realms. Many stone circles and burial monuments were positioned near significant water sources, while some were deliberately sited to incorporate views of distant water bodies or to channel water flow through or around the monuments themselves. The rollright stones in Oxfordshire include arrangements that direct seasonal water flow through specific parts of the stone circle, creating temporary pools and streams that would have enhanced the site's ritual significance during particular times of year. Natural rock formations were often incorporated into megalithic monuments as sacred elements that connected human constructions with the deeper geological history of the landscape. The Externstein in Germany includes natural sandstone pillars that were modified with carved chambers, stairways, and relief sculptures that transformed the natural formation into an elaborate ritual complex. Similar modifications of natural rock features appear across megalithic Europe, with communities investing substantial labour in carving chambers, passages, and symbolic decorations into existing geological formations. The creation of artificial landscapes through earthwork construction became increasingly sophisticated during this period, with communities reshaping entire hillsides and valleys to create appropriate settings for megalithic monuments. The Silbury Hill in Wiltshire, standing 40 metres high and containing over 300,000 cubic metres of chalk and earth, represents one of the most massive artificial constructions in prehistoric Europe. The hill's construction required sophisticated engineering to ensure structural stability while creating the precise conical form that made it visible from great distances across the surrounding landscape. The symbolic significance of these artificial landscapes extended beyond their function as monument platforms to encompass complex meanings related to community identity, territorial control, and cosmological beliefs. The construction of massive earthworks demonstrated communities' ability to mobilise enormous labour forces while creating permanent markers of their presence in the landscape. These monuments served as focal points for regional identity that connected scattered settlements into unified cultural territories defined by shared ritual practices and architectural traditions. The maintenance of megalithic monuments over extended periods required ongoing community investment and the transmission of specialised knowledge across generations. Archaeological evidence indicates that many monuments underwent periodic renovation and modification that reflected changing ritual practices and evolving architectural capabilities. The multiple construction phases at Stonehenge span over 1,500 years and demonstrate sustained community commitment to maintaining and enhancing the site's ritual significance, despite major cultural changes occurring in the surrounding region. The monumental construction projects and ritual landscapes that had transformed Atlantic Europe by 3,500 BC represented only one strand of human cultural development during this remarkable period. Across the vast expanse of Eurasia, from the forests of Central Europe to the river valleys of East Asia, diverse communities were simultaneously developing their own distinctive responses to the challenges and opportunities of Neolithic life. These regional variations reflected not merely different solutions to similar problems, but fundamentally different ways of organising society, understanding the natural world, and expressing cultural identity through material culture. The linear pottery culture, known to archaeologists as linear ban ceramic or LBK, emerged around 5,500 BC in the fertile river valleys of Central Europe and represents one of the most successful and far-reaching cultural expansions in human prehistory. Within just 5 centuries, LBK communities had spread from the Danube basin across an area extending from eastern France to western Ukraine, establishing a remarkably uniform cultural tradition across this vast territory. The distinctive pottery that gives the culture its name featured carefully executed linear designs applied to vessel surfaces using fine-toothed combs or pointed tools, creating geometric patterns of parallel lines, curves, and spirals that remained consistent across thousands of kilometres. LBK settlements followed a distinctive pattern that reflected sophisticated understanding of agricultural requirements and defensive considerations. Communities typically established themselves on elevated terraces overlooking major rivers, positioning their villages to take advantage of fertile alluvial soils while maintaining visual control over surrounding territories. The Bilany site in the Czech Republic exemplifies this settlement pattern, with its location on a loess terrace providing access to rich agricultural land, while offering natural defensive advantages and commanding views of the Elbe River Valley. Archaeological surveys have identified over 100 LBK sites within a 50-kilometre radius of Bilany, indicating population densities that approach the carrying capacity of the available agricultural land. The longhouses that characterised LBK settlements represented a distinctive architectural tradition adapted to the forest environments of temperate Europe. These massive timber structures, some exceeding 40 metres in length, were constructed using sophisticated post and beam techniques that required advanced woodworking skills and careful planning of structural elements. The Curie-les-Chaudards site in France has yielded detailed information about LBK construction methods, revealing that builders selected specific tree species for different structural components: oak for the primary load-bearing posts, ash for secondary framing elements, and birch for wall panels and roofing materials. The internal organisation of LBK longhouses reflected complex social arrangements that accommodated extended families while providing spaces for specialised activities. Archaeological evidence suggests that these structures were divided into distinct functional areas, with residential spaces concentrated in the central portions, while the ends served for storage, craft production, and possibly animal housing during winter months. The largest houses at sites like Eldsluw in the Netherlands contained up to 20 distinct activity areas, including specialised zones for pottery production, flint knapping, textile manufacture, and food processing. LBK agricultural systems demonstrated remarkable sophistication in crop selection and field management techniques adapted to the heavy soils and dense forests of Central Europe. Communities cultivated the full suite of Near Eastern founder crops: emmer and einkorn wheat, barley, lentils, peas, and flax, but adapted their farming methods to local environmental conditions. The forest clearance techniques employed by LBK farmers involved systematic burning of woodland areas, followed by the cultivation of cleared plots for several years before allowing forest regeneration. This slash-and-burn agriculture required detailed knowledge of forest ecology, soil fertility cycles, and the optimal timing of burning operations to maximise agricultural productivity. The standardisation of material culture across LBK territories indicates sophisticated mechanisms for maintaining cultural unity despite the vast geographical distances involved. Pottery forms and decorative styles remained remarkably consistent from Hungary to Belgium, suggesting either rapid cultural transmission or the movement of specialist potters who maintained traditional techniques across the culture's expansion. The stone tool assemblages show similar standardization, with specific implement types appearing in consistent proportions at sites throughout LBK territory, indicating shared technological traditions and possibly centralized training systems for tool production. Trade networks within LBK territory facilitated the movement of both utilitarian goods and exotic materials across impressive distances. Spondylus shell ornaments from the Mediterranean reached LBK sites in Germany and Poland, while high-quality flint from Belgian sources appears at settlements throughout the culture's eastern territories. The Reekholt flint mines in the Netherlands show evidence of systematic extraction operations that supplied raw materials to communities across a radius of several hundred kilometres, demonstrating the organisational capabilities required to maintain large-scale resource distribution networks. The expansion of LBK culture appears to have involved actual population movements, rather than merely the adoption of new technologies by existing communities. Genetic studies of modern European populations suggest substantial demographic contributions from Near Eastern farming populations during this period, while isotopic analysis of skeletal remains from LBK cemeteries indicates that many individuals were born in different regions from where they were buried. The Talheim massacre site in Germany provides dramatic evidence for the conflicts that sometimes accompanied this expansion, with 34 individuals killed by stone axes in what appears to have been a coordinated attack on an LBK community. Simultaneously, far to the east, the Yangshao culture was developing along the Yellow River and its tributaries in northern China, creating a distinctive Neolithic tradition adapted to the unique environmental conditions of the Chinese Loess Plateau. Beginning around 5000 BC, Yangshao communities established settlements characterized by semi-subterranean houses, elaborate painted pottery, and sophisticated millet cultivation systems that would form the foundation for Chinese agricultural civilization. The Banpo site near modern Xi'an provides exceptional insights into Yangshao life, with its well-preserved village layout revealing a planned community of over 100 houses arranged around a central plaza and surrounded by a defensive ditch. Yangshao pottery represents one of the most artistically sophisticated ceramic traditions of the Neolithic world, featuring elaborate painted designs executed in black and red pigments on burnished yellow or white surfaces. The decorative motifs included complex geometric patterns, stylized animal figures, and what appear to be early forms of Chinese pictographic writing. The technical quality of Yangshao ceramics required specialized knowledge of clay preparation, pigment chemistry, and firing techniques that produced vessels with exceptional durability and artistic appeal. Some vessels from the Miao-Digu site display painting techniques that involved multiple firings and the precise application of different pigments to achieve complex polychrome effects. The agricultural foundation of Yangshao culture rested on the cultivation of foxtail millet and broomcorn millet, crops that were well adapted to the semi-arid conditions and alkaline soils of northern China. These hardy grains could tolerate drought conditions and poor soils that would have been unsuitable for wheat or rice cultivation, allowing Yangshao communities to exploit marginal agricultural environments that remained unused by other farming traditions. The storage facilities at Yangshao sites include large ceramic vessels and underground pits designed specifically for millet preservation, with some installations capable of storing several tons of grain to sustain communities through seasonal shortages and periodic droughts. Yangshao settlements demonstrate sophisticated approaches to community planning and resource management that reflect deep understanding of local environmental conditions. Villages were typically positioned on elevated terraces overlooking river valleys, with house locations carefully chosen to maximize solar exposure while providing protection from prevailing winds. The semi-subterranean construction technique involved excavating circular or rectangular pits approximately 1 meter deep, then constructing timber-framed walls and thatched roofs that created well-insulated living spaces suitable for the extreme temperature variations of continental China. The social organization of Yangshao communities appears to have emphasized collective decision-making and resource sharing, with archaeological evidence suggesting relatively egalitarian social structures compared to contemporary cultures in other regions. Burial practices show limited differentiation in grave goods or mortuary treatment, while house sizes remain fairly consistent within individual settlements. However, some sites contain larger structures that may have served as community meeting places or the residences of influential individuals, indicating the presence of some social hierarchy within the overall egalitarian framework. Far to the northeast, the Jomon culture of Japan was simultaneously developing one of the world's most sophisticated hunter-gatherer traditions, demonstrating that complex societies could emerge without agricultural foundations. The Jomon people, whose culture persisted from approximately 14,000 to 300 BC, created elaborate pottery traditions, monumental architecture, and sophisticated resource management systems while maintaining economies based entirely on hunting, fishing, and gathering. The Sanai Maruyama site in northern Japan reveals a Jomon settlement that supported over 500 residents for more than 1,500 years, making it one of the largest and most stable prehistoric communities in the world. Jomon pottery achieved extraordinary artistic and technical sophistication, with vessel forms and decorative schemes that evolved continuously throughout the culture's long existence. The Middle Jomon period, around 3,500, 2,500 BC, witnessed the creation of some of the most elaborate ceramic art ever produced, with vessels featuring complex three-dimensional sculptural elements, intricate surface textures, and flamboyant rim decorations that transformed utilitarian containers into works of art. The flame-style pottery of the Chubu region displays rim decorations that rise in elaborate peaks and spirals, creating dramatic silhouettes that required exceptional skill to construct and fire successfully. The subsistence strategies employed by Jomon communities demonstrate remarkable sophistication in exploiting diverse natural resources without depleting them through overuse. Coastal sites like Torihama show evidence for intensive shellfish harvesting, with massive shell middens containing millions of individual specimens, representing systematic exploitation of marine resources over many centuries. Inland sites focused on hunting deer, wild boar and smaller game while gathering nuts, berries and other plant foods according to seasonal availability. The management of chestnut groves at sites like Sanai Maruyama suggests that Jomon communities practice forms of forest management that enhance the productivity of wild resources without full domestication. Jomon settlements display considerable architectural diversity, ranging from small seasonal camps to large permanent villages with substantial timber structures. The pit houses characteristic of many Jomon sites were constructed by excavating circular or oval depressions and erecting timber frameworks that supported thatched roofs extending to ground level. These structures provided excellent insulation against harsh winter conditions, while remaining relatively easy to construct and maintain. The largest houses at Sanai Maruyama measured over 10 meters in diameter and could accommodate extended families during winter months when outdoor activities were limited. The monumental architecture created by Jomon communities included massive timber structures that rival the megalithic monuments of Atlantic Europe in their engineering requirements and symbolic significance. The Great Pillar Building at Sanai Maruyama featured 6 enormous chestnut posts, each over 1 meter in diameter, arranged in 2 parallel rows to create a structure approximately 15 meters long and 10 meters wide. The construction of this building required sophisticated timber selection, transportation, and erection techniques, while its maintenance over several centuries demonstrates sustained community investment in monumental architecture. Regional environmental adaptations during this period produced remarkable innovations as communities developed specialized technologies and social systems suited to particular ecological niches. The lake-dwelling cultures that emerged in the alpine regions of Switzerland, Germany and Austria around 4000 BC created distinctive settlement forms adapted to wetland environments. These communities constructed their villages on artificial platforms supported by thousands of wooden piles driven into lake beds, creating stable foundations for houses and other structures, while providing protection from floods and hostile neighbours. The Hornstad-Hornli site on Lake Constance exemplifies the sophisticated engineering capabilities of alpine lake dwellers, with its platform supported by over 100,000 wooden piles arranged in systematic patterns that distributed structural loads across the lake bed. The construction process involved selecting appropriate timber species, seasoning wood to prevent rot, and driving piles using specialised equipment that could operate in aquatic environments. Archaeological analysis of the pile arrangements reveals that different sections of the platform were constructed at different times, indicating planned expansion of the settlement as population grew. The preservation conditions in waterlogged lake sediments have provided exceptional insights into the material culture and daily life of alpine lake-dwelling communities. Organic artifacts that would normally decay in terrestrial sites survive in remarkable condition, including wooden tools, textile fragments, leather goods, and even food remains that reveal detailed information about prehistoric diets and subsistence strategies. The Arbonbleich site has yielded over 100,000 individual artifacts, creating one of the most complete pictures of Neolithic material culture available anywhere in the world. Lake-dwelling communities developed sophisticated fishing technologies adapted to freshwater environments, including specialized nets, traps, and fishing hooks designed for different species and seasonal conditions. The fish remains from sites like Tuan show systematic exploitation of multiple species including pike, perch, and whitefish, with evidence for seasonal fishing strategies that maximize catches during spawning runs and other periods of abundance. The processing and preservation of fish required specialized knowledge and equipment, including smoking facilities and storage containers designed to maintain fish quality over extended periods. Agricultural adaptations in the alpine region involved cultivating crops suited to the cool, moist conditions and short growing seasons characteristic of higher elevations. Lake-dwelling communities grew hardy varieties of wheat and barley, along with legumes and flax, but they also cultivated opium poppies and other plants that may have had medicinal or ritualistic applications. The waterlogged preservation conditions have provided direct evidence for prehistoric agriculture, including actual seeds, pollen, and even preserved loaves of bread that reveal the composition and preparation techniques used for cereal foods. Desert adaptations in North Africa during this period produced equally remarkable innovations as communities developed strategies for exploiting arid environments that would have been uninhabitable without sophisticated water management and resource conservation techniques. The Sahara during the early to mid-Holocene experienced much more humid conditions than today, supporting grassland and woodland environments that could sustain substantial human populations. However, as conditions gradually became more arid after 5000 BC, communities were forced to develop increasingly sophisticated adaptations to water scarcity and environmental unpredictability. The rock art sites of the Central Sahara provide exceptional documentation of the cultural and environmental changes that occurred during this period. The Tassili Nadjer Plateau in Algeria contains thousands of rock paintings and engravings that chronicle the transition from humid to arid conditions through their depictions of changing fauna and human activities. Early paintings show scenes of abundant wildlife including elephants, rhinoceros, hippopotamus, and giraffes, while later images focus on cattle herding and eventually camel domestication as communities adapted to increasingly arid conditions. The artistic traditions documented in Saharan rock art demonstrate sophisticated symbolic systems and aesthetic sensibilities that rival contemporary art traditions in other regions. The Roundhead period paintings, dating to approximately 6000–4000 BC, feature large human figures with elaborate headdresses and body decorations, rendered in a distinctive style that emphasizes spiritual or supernatural themes. These images often appear in remote locations that required considerable effort to reach, suggesting that the painting process itself had ritual significance beyond the creation of permanent visual records. Pastoral adaptations in the Sahara involved the development of specialized herding strategies suited to environments with limited and unpredictable water sources. Archaeological evidence from sites like Nabta Playa in southern Egypt shows that pastoral communities constructed sophisticated water management systems, including wells, storage basins, and seasonal camps positioned to take advantage of ephemeral water sources. These systems required detailed knowledge of local hydrology, seasonal weather patterns, and animal behavior that allowed herders to maintain livestock in environments that modern pastoralists would find extremely challenging. The megalithic monuments constructed at Nabta Playa demonstrate that pastoral communities were capable of sophisticated, astronomical observations and monumental architecture despite their mobile lifestyles. The stone circles and alignments at the site incorporate precise orientations to celestial phenomena, including the summer solstice sunrise and the rising of specific star groups that would have been important for calendrical and navigational purposes. The construction of these monuments required coordinated labour from multiple pastoral groups and the development of shared astronomical knowledge that transcended individual community boundaries. Language family dispersals during this period appear to correlate closely with the expansion of agricultural populations and the establishment of new cultural traditions across vast geographical areas. The spread of Indo-European languages across Europe and parts of Asia may have been associated with the westward expansion of pastoral peoples from the Pontic-Caspian steppes, while the dispersal of Sino-Tibetan languages could reflect the expansion of millet farming populations from northern China. These linguistic expansions involve not merely the adoption of new languages by existing populations, but substantial demographic movements that introduced new genetic lineages along with cultural and technological innovations. The Kurgan culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppes, emerging around 4000 BC, developed distinctive burial practices and material culture traditions that would spread across much of Europe during subsequent millennia. The characteristic burial mounds or kurgans that give the culture its name contained elaborate graves with wheeled vehicles, horse remains, and sophisticated metalwork that reflect the emergence of pastoral societies with advanced transportation technologies. The Maikop kurgan in the northern Caucasus contained over 5,000 gold and silver objects, along with the remains of wheeled vehicles and horse harness equipment, demonstrating the wealth and technological sophistication achieved by steppe pastoral elites. The artistic traditions that emerged during this period of regional diversification reflect not only aesthetic preferences, but also complex symbolic systems that communicated cultural identity, religious beliefs, and social relationships. The decorated pottery of different cultural traditions displays distinctive stylistic elements that remained consistent across large geographical areas while evolving through time in response to changing cultural influences. The spiral motifs characteristic of many European Neolithic pottery traditions appear to have carried symbolic meanings related to concepts of time, regeneration, and cosmic cycles that transcended individual communities and cultural boundaries. Rock art traditions across different regions show remarkable similarities in certain symbolic elements, despite the vast distances and cultural differences separating the communities that created them. Spiral designs, hand stencils, and animal figures appear in rock art sites from Australia to Europe to the Americas, suggesting either common symbolic meanings or the independent development of similar artistic conventions in response to universal human experiences and cognitive patterns. The technical methods used to create rock art also show convergent development, with communities across different continents developing similar techniques for pigment preparation, surface preparation, and image application. The technical methods and symbolic systems that had emerged across diverse regional traditions by 3500 BC, created the foundation for unprecedented intensification of agricultural production and social organization during the following millennium. As communities consolidated their territorial control and refined their technological capabilities, they began implementing sophisticated strategies for maximizing agricultural output while simultaneously expanding into previously unexploited environments. This period witnessed the development of complex irrigation systems, terraced cultivation methods, and the revolutionary exploitation of secondary animal products that would fundamentally transform both subsistence strategies and social relationships. The irrigation systems that appeared across multiple regions during this period represented quantum leaps in hydraulic engineering that enabled communities to cultivate previously unusable land, while dramatically increasing yields from existing agricultural areas. In Mesopotamia, the Ubaid culture developed sophisticated canal networks that channeled water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers across vast alluvial plains, creating artificial oases capable of supporting dense populations in otherwise arid environments. The Tel Es-Sorwan site in Iraq contains evidence of irrigation channels dating to approximately 4000 BC, featuring carefully engineered gradients that maintained water flow while preventing erosion and siltation problems that could destroy entire systems. The construction of these early irrigation networks required unprecedented levels of community coordination and technical expertise. Archaeological surveys in southern Mesopotamia have identified canal systems extending over 100 kilometers from their river sources, with main channels feeding networks of smaller distributary canals that brought water to individual fields and settlements. The Eridu Canal system included sophisticated control structures with wooden gates and stone weirs that regulated water flow according to seasonal requirements and crop needs. These installations required regular maintenance by specialized work crews who understood hydraulic principles and possessed the organizational authority to coordinate water distribution among multiple communities. The social implications of large-scale irrigation were profound, creating new forms of interdependence between communities while generating opportunities for conflict over water rights and distribution priorities. Archaeological evidence from sites like Uruk suggests the emergence of administrative systems specifically designed to manage irrigation infrastructure and coordinate agricultural activities across entire watersheds. Clay tablets from this period contain what appear to be water allocation records and maintenance schedules, indicating the development of bureaucratic institutions capable of managing complex technological systems that transcended individual community boundaries. Terraced agriculture emerged simultaneously in mountainous regions across the globe as communities developed techniques for cultivating steep slopes that had previously been unsuitable for farming. The Andean highlands witnessed sophisticated terrace construction beginning around 3500 BC, with communities creating elaborate systems of stone-walled platforms that prevented soil erosion while maximizing the use of limited arable land. The Macahuamachuco site in Peru contains terraces that extend across entire valley systems, representing collective labor investments comparable to the megalithic monuments of contemporary Europe. The engineering challenges involved in terrace construction required sophisticated understanding of soil mechanics, drainage principles, and structural stability. Andean terrace builders developed techniques for creating stable retaining walls using carefully fitted stone masonry that could withstand the stresses imposed by tons of soil and the freeze-thaw cycles characteristic of high-altitude environments. The terraces incorporated sophisticated drainage systems with stone-lined channels that prevented waterlogging while directing runoff to lower levels where it could be captured and reused. Some terrace systems included microclimatic modifications such as stone heat collectors that extended growing seasons by several weeks, enabling the cultivation of crops at altitudes that would otherwise have been too cold for agriculture. The secondary products revolution represented perhaps the most significant economic transformation of this period, as communities learned to exploit domestic animals for renewable resources rather than merely meat production. The systematic harvesting of milk from cattle, sheep, and goats create entirely new categories of food resources, while providing economic incentives for maintaining larger animal populations. Archaeological evidence for early dairy production includes specialized pottery vessels with perforated bottoms used for cheese making and lipid residue analysis, showing milk fats in ceramic containers from sites across Europe and the Near East. The technological innovations required for dairy production extended far beyond simple milking techniques to include sophisticated processing methods for converting perishable milk into storable products. The development of cheesemaking involved understanding the biochemical processes of fermentation and curd formation, along with the construction of specialized facilities for aging and storing dairy products. Archaeological sites from this period contained stone-lined storage chambers with controlled temperature and humidity conditions ideal for cheese maturation, indicating that communities had developed systematic approaches to dairy processing that maximize nutritional value and storage life. Wool production underwent similar intensification as communities selectively bred sheep for enhanced fibre production, while developing sophisticated techniques for harvesting, processing, and converting wool into textiles. The morphological changes in domestic sheep during this period included the development of continuous wool growth that required annual shearing, creating mutual dependencies between humans and animals that fundamentally altered both species' evolutionary trajectories. Archaeological evidence from sites like Catalhoyuk included specialized tools for wool processing, including combs, spindles, and weaving equipment that demonstrate the integration of wool production into comprehensive textile manufacturing systems. The exploitation of animal traction power revolutionized agricultural productivity by enabling communities to cultivate larger areas while reducing human labor requirements for field preparation and harvesting activities. The domestication of cattle specifically for draft purposes required selecting animals with appropriate size, temperament, and physical characteristics for pulling ploughs and other agricultural implements. Archaeological evidence for early plough agriculture includes distinctive soil marks and furrow patterns preserved beneath burial mounds and other monuments, indicating that communities had developed systematic approaches to field cultivation using animal-powered equipment. The development of wheeled vehicles during this period created new possibilities for transportation and trade, while facilitating the expansion of agricultural communities into previously inaccessible regions. The earliest evidence for wheeled transport appears around 3500 BC in the Pontic-Caspian steppes, with burial sites containing remains of four-wheeled wagons, along with the harness equipment necessary for controlling draft animals. These early vehicles were constructed using sophisticated woodworking techniques that required understanding of wheel mechanics, axle design, and load distribution principles that enabled the transportation of heavy goods across considerable distances. The Bronises pot from Poland, dating to approximately 3400 BC, contains one of the earliest known depictions of a wheeled vehicle, showing a four-wheeled wagon with what appears to be a covered cargo area. The technical details visible in this representation suggest that wheeled transport had achieved considerable sophistication by this date, with vehicles designed for specific transportation requirements rather than merely experimental prototypes. The standardization of wheel construction techniques across different regions indicates the rapid spread of this technology through existing trade networks and cultural exchange systems. Population pressure during this period reached levels that forced communities to develop new strategies for territorial expansion and resource exploitation. Archaeological surveys across Europe and Asia reveal dramatic increases in settlement density and site size that indicate substantial population growth following the adoption of intensified agricultural techniques. The Cucuteni Tripilian culture of Ukraine and Romania created some of the largest settlements in prehistoric Europe, with sites like Talianki supporting populations estimated at over 15,000 individuals within areas exceeding 400 hectares. These massive settlements required sophisticated urban planning and infrastructure development that exceeded the capabilities of earlier communities. The Talianki site was organised according to systematic planning principles, with houses arranged in concentric circles around central plazas, while specialised areas were designated for craft production, storage and defensive purposes. The construction of such large settlements required coordinated labour involving thousands of individuals working according to predetermined architectural plans that balance functional requirements with defensive considerations and symbolic meanings. The territorial expansion that accompanied population growth led to the colonisation of previously unexploited environments, including islands, high-altitude regions, and marginal agricultural areas that required specialised adaptation strategies. The colonisation of Cyprus around 3800 BC involved sophisticated maritime transportation capabilities, along with the introduction of complete agricultural packages including domestic animals and crop plants that had no wild ancestors on the island. Archaeological evidence from Kyrokitia and other early Cypriot sites reveals that colonists brought cattle, sheep, goats and pigs along with wheat, barley and legumes, creating entirely artificial ecosystems that could support permanent human settlement. The expansion into high-altitude environments required developing specialised agricultural techniques and crop varieties adapted to extreme conditions, including short growing seasons, intense solar radiation, and frequent freeze-thaw cycles. Andean communities during this period began cultivating potatoes and quinoa at altitudes exceeding 4,000 metres, creating agricultural systems that could exploit environmental niches unavailable to communities using traditional Near Eastern crop packages. The development of these high-altitude agricultural systems required sophisticated understanding of plant breeding, soil management, and microclimatic manipulation that enabled communities to achieve food security in extremely challenging environments. Island colonization efforts during this period demonstrate remarkable seafaring capabilities and navigational skills that enabled communities to reach and settle remote islands across vast ocean distances. The colonization of the Mediterranean islands, beginning around 3500 BC, required sophisticated boat construction techniques and navigation methods that could ensure safe passage across hundreds of kilometres of open water. Archaeological evidence from Sardinia and Corsica includes the remains of substantial settlements established shortly after initial colonization, indicating that these expeditions involved large groups of colonists carrying complete technological and cultural packages rather than small exploratory parties. The technological convergence toward copper metallurgy during this period represented the culmination of centuries of experimentation with metalworking techniques and the beginning of fundamental changes in tool production and social organisation. The transition from simple cold hammering of native copper to systematic smelting of copper ores required understanding complex chemical processes and the development of specialised furnace technologies capable of achieving and maintaining the high temperatures necessary for metal extraction. Archaeological sites from this period contain increasingly sophisticated smelting installations with improved furnace designs, bellows systems, and slag management techniques that indicate rapid advancement in metallurgical knowledge. The Belivod site in Serbia contains some of the most advanced copper smelting facilities from this period, with furnaces featuring stone-lined combustion chambers connected to sophisticated air delivery systems that provided the controlled atmospheres necessary for efficient copper extraction. The furnace designs incorporated multiple innovations including preheating chambers that improved fuel efficiency, slag tapping systems that facilitated the separation of metallic copper from waste materials, and temperature control mechanisms that enabled smelters to achieve optimal reduction conditions. The technical sophistication of these installations indicates that copper production had become a specialized craft requiring extensive training and experience to master. The social implications of metallurgical development extended far beyond improved tool production to include the creation of new forms of wealth, status differentiation, and trade relationships. Copper objects required substantial investments in raw materials, fuel, and skilled labor that made them valuable commodities suitable for long-distance exchange and status display. The appearance of elaborate copper axes, daggers, and ornaments in elite burials indicates that metal objects had achieved symbolic significance that transcended their practical utility, serving as markers of social status and indicators of access to specialized craft production. Complex exchange networks during this period achieved unprecedented geographical scope and organizational sophistication, connecting communities across entire continents through systematic trading relationships that move both utilitarian goods and luxury items. The obsidian trade networks of the Mediterranean region extended from sources in Sardinia and Lipari to consumer sites across Italy, France, and North Africa, creating distribution systems that remained stable over many centuries. Chemical analysis of obsidian artifacts reveals that individual sources supplied consistent market areas, suggesting the existence of territorial agreements and established trading partnerships that regulated access to raw materials and finished products. The spondylus shell trade represented another major exchange network that connected Mediterranean coastal communities with inland settlements across the Balkans and Central Europe. These marine shells were processed into ornaments, ritual objects, and status symbols that played important roles in the social and religious life of agricultural communities far from their sources. The standardization of shell processing techniques and ornament forms across vast geographical areas indicates either the movement of specialist craftspeople or the transmission of detailed technical knowledge through established trading relationships. Prestige goods economies emerged as communities developed systematic approaches to the production and exchange of objects that derive their value primarily from symbolic rather than utilitarian considerations. The elaborate goldwork of the Varna culture represented one of the most sophisticated examples of prestige goods production, with objects requiring exceptional technical skills and substantial raw material investments that made them accessible only to elite individuals. The concentration of gold objects in particular burials, while others contained no precious metals whatsoever, indicates that these materials served as markers of social differentiation rather than utilitarian tools available to all community members. The production of prestige goods required specialized knowledge and equipment that created new categories of craft specialists with distinctive social positions within their communities. Master goldsmiths possessed technical skills that required years of training to develop, along with access to rare raw materials and specialized tools that gave them unique economic roles. Archaeological evidence suggests that these specialists enjoyed elevated social status and maintained trading relationships that connected them with counterparts in distant regions, creating professional networks that transcended local community boundaries. The standardization of prestige goods forms and decorative techniques across large geographical areas indicates the existence of shared aesthetic traditions and technical knowledge that unified elite groups across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The spiral motifs that appear on gold ornaments from Bulgaria to Ireland suggest either common symbolic meanings or the movement of specialist craftspeople who maintain consistent artistic traditions while working for different patron communities. The technical similarities in metalworking techniques across these vast distances indicate systematic knowledge transmission through established training relationships and craft guild organizations. The prestige goods economies and sophisticated craft specialization that had emerged across Eurasia by 3200 BC created the technological and social foundations for the most revolutionary transformation in human material culture since the adoption of agriculture itself. The systematic exploitation of copper ores, which had begun as localized experiments in metallurgy, rapidly evolved into comprehensive bronze production systems that would fundamentally alter tool manufacturing, military capabilities, and social organization across the ancient world. This transition represented far more than a simple substitution of metal for stone implements. It marked the emergence of entirely new economic relationships, political structures, and cultural values that would define human civilization for millennia to come. The development of bronze metallurgy required understanding complex alloying processes that transformed relatively soft copper into hard, durable metal suitable for tools and weapons superior to their stone predecessors. The discovery that adding tin to copper in proportions of approximately 10 to 12% produced an alloy with enhanced hardness, castability, and corrosion resistance emerged through systematic experimentation conducted by specialist metalworkers across multiple regions. Archaeological evidence from sites like Kestel in Anatolia reveals sophisticated mining operations that extracted cassiterite from underground workings extending over 60 meters below ground level, requiring advanced understanding of geology, structural engineering, and ventilation systems to maintain safe working conditions. The technical challenges of bronze production exceeded those of simple copper working by several orders of magnitude. Bronze casting required precise temperature control to achieve proper alloy composition, while the creation of complex objects demanded sophisticated mold-making techniques using stone, clay, or sand matrices. The lost wax casting process, which appeared around 3000 BC, enabled metalworkers to create intricate objects with internal cavities and complex surface details that would have been impossible using simple open molds. This technique involved creating wax models of desired objects, encasing them in clay molds, then melting out the wax and replacing it with molten bronze, a process requiring exceptional skill and precise timing to achieve successful results. The Arslan Tepe site in Turkey contains some of the earliest evidence for systematic bronze production, with workshops featuring sophisticated furnace installations capable of achieving the temperatures necessary for tin-bronze alloys. These furnaces incorporated multiple innovations, including forced air systems using leather bellows, temperature monitoring techniques using test ingots, and crucible designs that minimized metal loss during melting operations. The workshop areas contained specialized toolkits, including bronze-tipped tongs for handling hot metal, stone anvils shaped for specific forming operations, and an array of hammers designed for different aspects of metalworking. The social implications of bronze technology extended far beyond improved tool performance to encompass fundamental changes in economic organization and political power. Bronze production required access to tin sources that were geographically restricted and often located hundreds of kilometers from copper deposits, creating dependencies on long-distance trade networks that could be controlled by emerging political elites. The Ulubran shipwreck off the Turkish coast, dating to approximately 1300 BC but representing trade patterns established much earlier, contained tin ingots from sources in Afghanistan alongside copper from Cyprus, demonstrating the vast geographical scope of Bronze Age trade networks. Control over metal production became a primary source of political power, as bronze weapons provided decisive military advantages over stone-armed opponents. The earliest bronze weapons appeared around 3200 BC in the form of simple daggers and spearheads, but weapon technology rapidly evolved to include sophisticated swords, axes, and specialized military equipment that required substantial investments in raw materials and skilled craftsmanship. The Nebra sky disk from Germany, dating to approximately 2100 BC, demonstrates the integration of bronze technology with astronomical knowledge and ritual symbolism, featuring a bronze disc inlaid with gold representations of celestial phenomena that served both practical and ceremonial functions. Archaeological evidence for the gradual replacement of stone tools with metal implements reveals a complex transition process that occurred over several centuries rather than representing an abrupt technological shift. Early bronze tools coexisted with traditional stone implements, with communities gradually adopting metal technology for specific applications where superior performance justified the additional costs. Bronze axes proved particularly advantageous for woodworking tasks, enabling more efficient forest clearance and timber processing that facilitated expansion into previously unexploited territories. The standardization of bronze axe forms across large geographical areas indicates systematic production methods and quality control procedures that ensured consistent performance characteristics. The emergence of specialized bronze working centers created new forms of economic organization based on centralized production and distribution systems. The Unitis culture of Central Europe, flourishing between 2300 and 1600 BC, developed sophisticated bronze production facilities that supplied finished goods across a market area extending from the Baltic Sea to the Adriatic. Archaeological analysis of bronze compositions reveals that Unitis metalworkers achieved remarkable consistency in alloy ratios, indicating systematic quality control procedures and standardized production techniques that enabled mass production of reliable tools and weapons. Warrior elites emerged as dominant social classes in many regions, as bronze weapons technology created new military capabilities and altered traditional power relationships. The appearance of elaborate warrior burials containing bronze swords, spearheads, and defensive equipment marks a fundamental shift toward militarized societies where martial prowess became a primary source of social status. The Amesbury Archer burial in England, dating to approximately 2300 BC, contained over 100 artifacts including bronze daggers, gold ornaments, and specialized archery equipment that indicate the deceased held high military rank within his community. The development of hierarchical chiefdoms during this period reflected the need for centralized authority capable of organizing complex economic activities, managing territorial disputes, and coordinating military operations. Archaeological evidence from sites like Mycenae in Greece reveals the emergence of palatial complexes with specialized administrative areas, storage facilities, and workshops that indicate sophisticated bureaucratic organization. Linear B tablets from later periods provide insights into the administrative systems that manage Bronze Age chiefdoms, including detailed records of bronze production, weapon distribution, and military personnel that demonstrate systematic approaches to resource management and territorial control. Fortification construction reached unprecedented levels of sophistication as communities invested heavily in defensive architecture designed to protect against bronze-armed attackers. The hill fort at Maiden Castle in England underwent major expansion during this period, with defensive circuits incorporating multiple lines of earthworks, elaborate entrance systems, and specialized areas for storing weapons and supplies. The construction of these massive fortifications required coordinated labor, involving thousands of workers over multiple construction seasons, demonstrating the organizational capabilities of emerging political authorities. The transformation of burial practices during the Bronze Age reflects fundamental changes in social organization and religious beliefs that accompanied technological innovation. The shift from collective burial in megalithic tombs to individual interments in barrows and cist graves indicates increasing emphasis on personal achievement and hereditary status, rather than communal identity. The Leubingen burial in Germany, dating to approximately 1940 BC, contained a wooden chamber housing an elderly male accompanied by bronze weapons, gold ornaments, and exotic materials that demonstrate the wealth accumulation possible for successful Bronze Age elites. The decline of megalithic building traditions occurred gradually as communities redirected their collective labour investments from monument construction to economic and military activities. The latest megalithic monuments, constructed around 2500 BC, show reduced scale and technical sophistication compared to earlier examples, suggesting that communities no longer possess the organisational capacity or cultural motivation for massive stone construction projects. The abandonment of sites like Stonehenge around 2000 BC marks the end of a building tradition that had persisted for over 2,000 years. Archaeological evidence for the transition away from megalithic burial practices includes the systematic dismantling of earlier monuments and the reuse of their stones for new construction projects. Many stone circles and passage tombs show evidence of deliberate destruction during the early Bronze Age, with their materials incorporated into field walls, house foundations, and other utilitarian structures. This pattern suggests active rejection of earlier religious traditions, rather than simple abandonment due to changing cultural preferences. The development of new burial customs during the Bronze Age emphasised individual achievement and social differentiation through elaborate grave goods and distinctive mortuary architecture. Round barrows became the dominant burial form across much of Europe, with these earthen mounds containing wooden or stone chambers housing single individuals accompanied by bronze weapons, pottery vessels, and personal ornaments. The bush barrow burial in England contained a gold-decorated bronze dagger, a stone mace head, and gold belt fittings that demonstrate the wealth and status achieved by Bronze Age elites. The standardization of burial practices across large geographical areas indicates the emergence of shared cultural traditions that transcended local community boundaries. The bell beaker culture, which spread across Atlantic Europe between 2800 and 1900 BC, established consistent burial customs featuring distinctive pottery vessels, copper daggers, and archery equipment that appear in graves from Scotland to Sicily. This cultural uniformity suggests either large-scale population movements or the rapid adoption of prestige customs by local elites seeking to demonstrate their connection to broader cultural networks. The environmental impact of Bronze Age societies exceeded that of earlier Neolithic communities through intensified mining operations, expanded agricultural systems, and increased population densities that fundamentally altered natural landscapes. Copper mining at sites like the Great Orme in Wales involved the excavation of over 5 kilometres of underground tunnels that removed thousands of tons of ore-bearing rock from hillside deposits. These operations required systematic forest clearance to provide fuel for smelting operations, while the associated settlements created permanent anthropogenic landscapes where human activities dominated natural processes. Agricultural intensification during the Bronze Age involved the cultivation of previously marginal lands through improved ploughing techniques, systematic field drainage, and the development of crop varieties adapted to different environmental conditions. The adoption of bronze ploughshares enabled farmers to work heavier soils that had been inaccessible using wooden implements, while bronze sickles improved harvesting efficiency and reduced labour requirements. Archaeological evidence from sites like Flagfen in England reveals systematic field systems with drainage ditches and boundary markers that indicate sophisticated approaches to landscape management. Population growth during this period reached levels that strained the carrying capacity of available agricultural land in many regions, creating pressures for territorial expansion and resource competition that contributed to increasing levels of warfare. Settlement surveys across Europe reveal dramatic increases in site numbers and sizes that indicate substantial demographic expansion following the adoption of bronze technology. The Terramar culture of northern Italy created densely packed settlements supporting populations that may have exceeded 10,000 individuals within individual sites. The legacy of the Neolithic revolution became fully apparent during this transitional period, as the agricultural foundations established millennia earlier enabled the emergence of complex civilizations capable of supporting large populations, specialized crafts, and monumental architecture. The transformation of hunter-gatherer societies into agricultural communities had created the demographic base and economic surplus necessary for Bronze Age innovations, while the social institutions developed during the Neolithic provided organizational models for emerging political hierarchies. The fundamental impact of Neolithic innovations on human civilization extended far beyond technological achievements to encompass basic changes in human relationships with the natural world and each other. The domestication of plants and animals had created artificial ecosystems dependent upon human management, while sedentary lifestyles had established permanent connections between communities and particular territories that would influence political organization for millennia. The development of craft specialization and trade networks had created economic relationships that connected distant communities through systematic exchange systems. The environmental transformation initiated during the Neolithic accelerated dramatically during the Bronze Age as human activities began to dominate natural processes across entire landscapes. Forest clearance for agriculture and fuel production had eliminated original vegetation across vast areas of Europe and Asia, while mining operations had created permanent scars in the landscape that would persist for thousands of years. The introduction of domestic animals had altered grazing patterns and vegetation communities, while intensive agriculture had modified soil chemistry and hydrology across entire watersheds. As the Bronze Age reached full development around 2500 BC, the technological and social foundations established during the Neolithic had been transformed into complex civilizations capable of achievements that would have been inconceivable to the first farmers of the Fertile Crescent. The journey from the earliest agricultural experiments at sites like Abu Huraira to the sophisticated bronze-producing societies of the second millennium BC represented one of the most remarkable transformations in human history, a revolution that had converted small bands of hunter-gatherers into complex societies capable of monumental architecture, long-distance trade, and technological innovation that would provide the foundation for all subsequent human civilization. The Neolithic revolution had fundamentally altered the trajectory of human development, creating the demographic, technological, and social foundations that made possible the emergence of the first cities, states, and empires. The agricultural surplus that enabled craft specialization, the organizational skills developed through collective construction projects, and the trade networks that connected distant communities had established the basic framework for complex civilization that would persist with continuous elaboration and refinement throughout the remainder of human history.